How are you feeling? How long have you been here?
3 months, May 17th.
And what brought you?
That's difficult to answer.
Eventually resulted in your being here in the hospital.
That's difficult to answer.
this the end? There's a noise inside my head of crying people facing death. Is this the end? Is this the end? Oh, I'm burning in the stone here. There's no place to hide. I'm burning in the stone here. This is the final time. What have we done to the world? What have we done to the world? I'm burning in the stone here. There's no place to hide. I'm burning in the stone here. This is the final
What up, everyone? Happy Monday. Happy Memorial Day. I hope some of you got to a barbecue today. I actually left my house today for the first... Well, actually, no, I left my house on Friday. So it's been a banner week. I've left my house twice in 1 week. And, you know, I left my house today and I went and I walked among the normies. And I had a bowl of soup and Panera bread with the normies. And then I came home and was glad not to be around normies anymore. No offense, normies. But, like, it's just weird. It's just weird. It's like, I feel like there's, like, you know, it's a quiet day because, like, it's a holiday. People are relaxing and having barbecues or doing whatever they're doing. And, you know, it's just like, sometimes I'm like, what are we saving? What are we trying to do here? Because I don't know if I like normies and I don't know if I want to be in normal world. And I don't know how to function in this environment anymore. Anyway, this is what I've done to myself by being on the internet all the time with you guys. You stayed home and deleted files on your laptop. That actually sounds like a really, really good idea. I should probably have done that. No, I should have probably done that. Well, you know what I was actually doing is I was actually working on a timeline project for Queer Marxism. Queer Marxism is a project that's going to be going under the Center for Left-Wing Studies, and I'm working on a big fuck-off timeline of the development of queer theory in the United States and queer activism in the United States, and I did all sorts of research for it, and AI helped me do research for it, and I used multiple AIs to do research for it just to make sure I had everything, and I'm actually excited about it. It's going to be one of the first big things we put on the Queer Marxism Project website, which is queermarxism.com. If you're not on that website, don't worry about it. There's really nothing on there yet that you guys know about. There's a whole bunch of stuff I'm building out on the back end. But, like, this is basically going to be kind of like, I'm framing it in my head as an online museum about the rise of queer activism in the United States, and it's going to have its own personality and stuff like that. I'm actually really excited about this project. So I was working on a timeline to build out on this website, and then I realized, breaking news, Colin Wright still doesn't know what the fuck queer theory is. So we're going to make fun of him for a second. Rottweiler says Peterson should be a cautionary tale about staying far away from the kosher right, especially from the Daily Wire, where your career goes to die. So true, so true. We'll talk more about Jordan Peterson in a minute, but it came to my attention that There is a breaking news update from Colin Wright, who claims to be an expert in queer theory and yet doesn't understand it at all. And so I just wanted to watch this real quick. He says, queer theory's answers to all problems is to sexualize them by inventing new bespoke sexualities. So far on the podcast, we've seen ecosexuals who eroticize nature, hydrosexuals who sexualize water, and now petrosexuals who get off on petrol products. Let's just listen to the brain trust from the Manhattan Institute and what he has to say about queer theory.
You're telling me someone's getting a PhD and publishing papers for analyzing weird memes and Instagram thirst traps that somehow involve trans people, trucks, and oil. Okay.
That's what I'm telling you. He doesn't just stop there, though. I mean, it would be one thing if he just had like this analysis. And if you want to steal man, you could say that like, oh, this is an interesting bit of culture. Like, what is this magazine about? But he doesn't just stop there. And when he does the analysis, it's crazy. But he invents like a whole new vocabulary and sexual identity. So he invents this idea called petrosexuality.
Not another letter. Please, God, we have enough letters. I mean, hang on. Also, we've already seen ecosexuals who marry the earth and try to, and then we've got the hydrosexuals who marry shrimp and sexualize water. I mean, what now? We've got somebody with an oil fetish masquerade.
I'm in hell. I'm literally in hell. We are in the movie Idiocracy, and the leaders in the Idiocracy that we're in are the so-called intellectuals on the right who just, yeah. How about retard sexual, Colin? And I don't know what the fuck is wrong with Brad, because Brad is actually smarter than this, is the thing. I have heard Brad in the past, perhaps years in the past now, sound way, way, way smarter than he's sounding on this podcast, like to like a significant degree. So you got Brad Palumbo, I think is his name, purposefully acting like he's a moron. And then you got Colin Wright pretending to understand things that he does not understand because he's obviously never actually studied and researched this stuff at all. And these are the people that are teaching the masses what queer theory is. And, this is the world that we live in. This is not helping. This is not helping. They just keep getting louder. And of course, they're funded by all of these Zionist organizations that want a very different message out there. And yep, he got dumber. He definitely got dumber. Do I think that they were directed to dumb everything down? I mean, I don't know if they were directed to so much as they just naturally did it. Like, it's not as though people can't understand this stuff when you show it to them. Like, I show my audience queer Marxism all the time and have for years. And listen, it might take my audience a couple minutes or maybe a couple episodes or maybe several episodes to catch on to what it is, because it is a little bit complicated at first. But I just don't even know what to say. Colin Wright is a PhD and he can't read a study. Rottweiler says they're paid to not know. Yeah, that might be. Now, in other news, James Lindsay wrote a giant cope post. And I mean a giant cope post. A giant cope post. Because James has been getting a lot of shit from Christians for this tweet he sent here. Thinking about pretending to be a Christian so I can tell Christians how bad they are at being Christian, and they'll have to listen to me. James sent this tweet on 5/21/24. So a year ago. It has come back to bite him many times. And James has decided to write, and I was going to talk about this on Socialism Saturday, but I was like, no, we're not ruining our glorious Socialism Saturday for James Lindsay's Cope Fest. Let me just read you a couple lines of this Cope Fest, okay? Okay, enough is enough with this. Let's talk about this, which is one of my most famous tweets, thanks to the woke Wright, which in totally not woke fashion leverages it to try to get me canceled with Christians all the time. Just to scroll all the way down here to the bottom, because we have to scroll a very long way to see the tweet. What James is saying is he's pissed off that people ruined his grift with the Christians by taking a screenshot of James's public statements and showing it to Christians, and then allowing the Christians to decide whether or not they wanted to associate with James. That's what he's saying. He's like, oh my God, these people showed other people my public statements. Well, we should make a James AI voice. That would actually be funny. The woke right use of this tweet is a special kind of stupid, as I'll make clear. But I'm going to explain what I said, why I said it, what it means, and why the woke right aren't just retarded, but also malicious. First things first, the righteous anger part. The woke right are literally retarded for leveraging this, and people who fall for it are also literally retarded. I am not sorry if I'm calling you literally retarded here, because you leverage it or fell for it. Why? Facts and logic. So James's explanation for people sharing his tweet where he's blatantly saying that he's going to manipulate Christians by pretending to be a Christian is, you are literally retarded, and everyone who took my tweet at face value is also literally retarded. And I'm not sorry for calling you literally retarded, because you are literally retarded based on facts and logic. The tweet says I am thinking about pretending to be a Christian so that Christians will listen to me. Here are facts and logic. I am not at any point anywhere pretending to be a Christian. Therefore, the premise of the tweet isn't even happening. Except that, does anyone recall over Easter when James went on a podcast, a Christian podcast, to say that maybe he's thinking about maybe opening his heart up to God? Because, I mean, James can technically say, hey, I didn't say I was a Christian. Well, no, James, but you went on a podcast at Easter saying maybe you were maybe considering maybe opening your heart and accepting Jesus Christ, maybe. I remember that. Does anyone else remember that? I remember that. Therefore, if you think this tweet means I'm manipulating Christians, which is what the woke right are alleging, you are literally retarded. The woke right who are trying to pass this off are literally retarded, both for trying to pass it off to you and probably for believing the garbage they're trying to pass. This is weak propaganda. Let me spell it out for you in case you're slow. I would actually have pretended to be Christian before I could manipulate Christians by pretending to be Christian. I have not at all, ever, anywhere. You know, Matthew, I was actually just thinking this in my head as I said the word retarded for the 15th time in this show. Well, sunshine, it's nice to hear that retarded is no longer shunned upon. You know, it is a bright side to all of this, isn't it? That we can say the word retarded again. We're allowed to use that word. Retarded is a word of my childhood. And I appreciate that I'm now allowed to use the word retarded in public. And I don't mean people with Down syndrome. People with Down syndrome are lovely and sacred beings that we should protect at all costs because they are pure souls. I'm not talking about people with Down syndrome. I'm talking about actual retards, okay? People with Down syndrome, beautiful. Actual retards like James, they get what they get. Try taking some of your influencers out of your own eye before you criticize the speck in mine. That dealt with, we can talk about the tweet itself. And I can be winsome and angelic like usual. 1. This tweet is what we call a flippant joke. I understand flippant doesn't come across well on the internet. I also understand that most of these geniuses don't know what flippant means and are pretending they can't recognize it. I'm here to help. Well, that's interesting, James. That's interesting because one time I made a flippant joke in private to someone else about you having a giant sword during a game of Fuck, Marry, Kill. And that flippant joke became kind of a little perpetual inside joke between me and someone else in private. And all of a sudden, I hear that you utilize that because after I had a falling out with that person, he sent the fucking DMs to you. And then you use the flippant joke that I made in private to run around the entire fucking internet telling people I tried to fuck you when I didn't. So I have some experiences with James Lindsay directly taking things that I made with as flippant jokes out of context completely to try to smear and defame me. And so I don't actually feel that sorry for you, Jimmy, that someone took a flippant joke that you made out of context. Boo fucking who. Cry me a river. You have done that a million times to many, many, many other people. Jimmy, you know what this is? This is karma. This is karma. You are the fucking king of taking flippant jokes out of context and twisting them to mean something they didn't mean, to disparage, defame, and smear your fucking rivals on the internet because your work doesn't hold up to scrutiny. And now you're upset that someone is coming back and taking an alleged flippant joke out of context to try to show the Christians that you service that you are not a Christian and have never been a Christian and will never be a Christian and are just trying to manipulate Christians for money. You're upset about it? I don't fucking care because you've done it over and over and over again to other people. I love karma. I do too, Suzanne. I do too. I do too. I love watching karma at work. It is a beautiful thing. Flippant, adjective, not serious about a serious subject, in an attempt to be funny or to appear clever. A flippant joke is one where you're kind of being backhanded in a humorous way that you don't mean seriously, usually to make a point. Let me explain the joke since people didn't and aren't getting it. Christians weren't listening to me about some things because I'm not Christian. So if I pretended to be Christian, they still wouldn't listen to me. That's the joke. I don't know that that's actually true, Jimmy. You can tell because of they'll have to listen. Anyway, I'm not going to read this whole thing because this is a long essay and I don't care. Let's just go down to the conclusions. Actually, let's just do the conclusions. Conclusion. A judgment or opinion reached after considering information. Okay. 1, that this tweet is paraded around against me so much is a woke right manipulation that is thoroughly woke and done for thoroughly woke reasons. It is very, 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 very woke. The tweet contains a flippant joke, which is a kind of joke that is not the same as a dad joke. It does not contain anything else. It's just a flippant joke. Okay, Jimmy. Okay. The woke manipulation involved in using this tweet to discredit me with Christians or others is literally retarded because I'm not even doing the premise, which is pretending to be Christians, except he went on a podcast at Easter and said maybe he was thinking about accepting Jesus into his heart. It's a joke, 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 it's a joke. I'm just saying, James, that if it was actually a joke, then maybe you wouldn't have had to write a whole fucking essay about it. If it was actually a joke, maybe your stepdaughter wouldn't be making posts on the internet blatantly telling people that you tried to convince her to be an atheist because she was trying to try out Christianity and you said you were very committed to her not being a Christian. Maybe when we're an adult on the internet, we need to actually take responsibility for our words. And listen, Jimmy, I've said a lot of things on the internet that have been taken out of context, and you could say the same of me. Karlyn, don't you need to take responsibility for some of the more spicy things you posted on the internet? Well, sure. And I think I have. I don't denounce anything I post on the internet, and I will tell people exactly why I posted it, but I'm not going to post a giant ass cope essay every time someone doesn't like a tweet. And I'm sure as shit not going to say to Christians, maybe I should just pretend to be a Christian because then Christians will listen to me. And I happen to know, Jimmy, that the majority of your paying audience is actually Christians. And so I can't imagine they took this too well. And that's really the problem. That's really what's going on. But I don't want to talk about James. I don't want to do that either. I want to talk about Jordan Peterson. And for the rest of this show, we're going to watch this Jordan Peterson Jubilee episode where I've seen a couple clips, and Jordan Peterson looks very, very, very angry in this episode. And I don't know why Jordan Peterson thought this episode was a good idea. But we're going to watch Jordan Peterson get his ass literally handed to him by college students. Wasn't Jordan Peterson supposed to be the guru of talking to young men? Wasn't Jordan Peterson supposed to be the guiding light for the young men of the internet? I think what was striking to me about watching clips from this podcast on Twitter or this show, whatever, was how much disdain Jordan Peterson seems to have for young men. How much just utter and complete disdain. And I can look at the panel in this little thing and know, okay, they're probably more on the left, fine. But Jordan Peterson is a clinical psychologist. He should be able to talk to people on the left. He should be able to talk to people on the right. I can talk to people on the left and the right. I don't have to. I've had communists come on my channel. I'm not a dick. But Jordan Peterson, the anger in him, the disdain, the elitism, it wafted off of him in the clips that I saw. And do you know what's interesting about this? The title of this video used to be One Christian versus 20 Atheists. The people who were in this video thought that they were showing up to debate a Christian. And then it was Jordan Peterson. And in the clip I saw, Jordan Peterson refused to say if he was a Christian or not. Now, like, this is a really simple yes or no question, right? If someone said, Karlyn, are you a Christian? I'd be like, nope. Nope, not in any way. Nope. More power to the Christians. I don't care if you're a Christian, but I am not a Christian. I'm not an atheist either. I have my own set of spiritual beliefs. We don't have to talk about that right now, but I'm absolutely 1000% not a Christian. And then, so is he an atheist then? Because apparently he was brought in to debate 20 atheists. So what is he? Does Jordan Peterson even know what he is? But what was interesting is after a clip got circulated on the internet where Jordan Peterson refused to say if he was a Christian or not, they changed the title of the video. Jubilee changed the title of the video after a clip started going viral in which Jordan Peterson refused to say if he was a Christian or not. Did Jordan Peterson even know where he was? Did Jordan Peterson know why he was there? The questions abound. So, guys, we're going to be watching that, and it's Memorial Day. We're taking a little bit easy today. We do have a community Zoom coming up at 7 p.m., so we will have to stop the stream for 7 p.m. If you want to join that community Zoom, head over to my Substack. That is Karlyn, Karlyn.substack.com. You will find the digest email on the very front of the homepage. That has your community Zoom information. If you are members of Locals, I'll send out the community Zoom information to that. Come and join us at 7 p.m. for a private unrecorded Zoom call and hang out for a little while. And then Mac B is doing a Godzilla movie in the supporter Discord at 9 p.m. tonight. So you can also find access to the supporter Discord. I'll just show you real quick. Hang on. I'm hearing sound. Hang on, you guys didn't hear that. Okay, so if you go to the Substack, just go to the Digest newsletter, and what you do is you click on it, and you scroll all the way down to the bottom. And underneath this red box, you're going to find access to the supporter Discord. You're going to find access to the community Zoom at 7 p.m. You're going to find some other supporter perks too. And thank you to everyone who supports my work. I really, really do appreciate it. And yep, you were watching 9 p.m. in the supporter Discord, King Kong versus Godzilla 1962. So I highly encourage everyone that's a supporter, join MacB in the supporter Discord. If you haven't joined the supporter Discord, you got plenty of time to do it. Just head over to the Digest email. The link to join the Discord is at the bottom. MacB will be showing that movie at 9 p.m. tonight, so I really hope everyone goes and joins him for a nice Godzilla movie night, and that'll be great. All right, let's get into Jordan Peterson, shall we? Lost my sound again. Hang on. Hang on. All right, Jordan Peterson, alleged Christian, maybe we're not sure, versus 20 atheists. Let's get this party started. Play. Oh, fucking...
You're a Christian.
You say that. I haven't claimed that.
Oh, what is this? Is this Christians versus atheists?
Don't be a smartass.
Either you're a Christian or you're not. Which one is it?
You're really quite something, you are.
Aren't I? But you're really quite nothing. Right? You're not a Christian.
Okay, I'm done with him.
See, that was the clip I saw on Twitter. Has it, by the way, who in the chat has seen this or has seen clips of this? 1 in the chat if you've watched this whole episode. 2 in the chat if you've seen clips of it. 3 in the chat if this is completely new to you. So 1 in the chat if you've watched this whole episode already and you just want to laugh with us again. 2 in the chat if you saw clips of it. 3 in the chat if this is completely new to you. Because that was the clip that I saw on Twitter. And I was like, holy shit, Jordan Peterson is an elitist, angry douchebag. Lots of 3s. Okay, lots of 3s, some 2s, couple 1s.
Hello there. I'm Dr. Jordan Peterson. I'm a clinical psychologist, a professor emeritus at the University of Toronto, an author, a podcaster, public speaker, and today I'm surrounded by 25 atheists.
Why would it matter that he's surrounded by 25 atheists if Jordan Peterson wasn't taking the Christian position?
My first claim, atheists reject God, but they don't understand what they're rejecting.
How? What is Jordan Peterson's basis for understanding God? If he's not a Christian and he's not an atheist, what is he? How does he understand? Listen, I call myself a generalized spiritualist because I've studied with spiritual teachers all over the world. I have a very good sense of what I believe God is. Like, I can articulate what I believe God is. What is Jordan Peterson basing his belief on what God is about? And what gives him the right to lecture a room full of atheists if he himself is not saying what he believes? Yeah, real Bobby.
Good afternoon, Dr. Peterson.
How are you doing?
So this claim here that atheists don't know what they're rejecting. My background is in studying to become a traditional Catholic priest, daily mass, daily rosary, going on long retreats, deep into the magisterium and biblical hermeneutics, like I was thoroughly in it. And it seems like I do know what I'm missing. Is there something that I missed over years of study, both this issue formally and living out religion so deeply?
Well, you obviously feel that you missed something when you were practicing for the priesthood. Your aim was off then. So there's always the possibility that it's still off now.
What was off about my aim in the first place?
I don't know. That might take a long time to figure out. But
then it seems kind of like this no true Scotsman type of fallacy in which you're the arbiter of people's aims and how they understand those aims to be. How is it that you can claim that people don't know something that you know about their life despite not having met them?
Well, it's obviously a generic claim, just like the atheist claim that there's no God is a generic claim.
It's not
in your
actually,
case, it would have to
really
be specified more, and I'm not claiming to understand what was going on in your mind, but my experience with atheists is twofold. is that they have a very reductive notion of what constitutes God, let's say in the Judeo-Christian tradition. And they've often been hurt by someone who was religious or by the religious enterprise or perhaps by God himself, so to speak, and that's left them with an animus.
But I think that you have a reductive view of what atheism is. You've defined religion so broadly to include any sort of having aim in life, any sort of cultural archetypes, or having a metaphorical substrate. And atheism to you is a very specific type of like 3 people in the world that are these Raskolnikov type of, they want to get away with a perfect murder. It seems like you have the reductive view of what an atheist is.
True.
Well, let's start with your claim. How do you define the God that you're rejecting? Like, what is God to you? You studied in the church, you found that unsatisfactory. How would you characterize what you...
How do you find the God that you're define the God that you're rejecting? That question doesn't even make sense. If he's rejecting the concept of God, then he's probably not rejecting it because it's a specific, like a Christian-focused concept. He's rejecting the whole idea of the concept in the first place.
Rejected.
I think the average Christian believer, when they say that they're Christian and they believe, they mean some sort of God that is all-powerful, all-perfect, is somehow involved in the matters of this world, and that we look to them through wisdom and with the Logos incarnate in Christ. And it also seems like you don't believe in religion in the way that the average Christian says that they believe in religion. And there are as many gods out there as there are believers, because everybody has mutually exclusive and different views of what God is. So it seems
Well,
like...
if everybody had mutually exclusive views of what God is, no one could speak to each other. The mere
What are you
fact of
talking about?
communication presumes a commonality of assumption and definition. And it's certainly not the
Jordan Peterson thinks you can't have conversations with people you disagree with. That doesn't make sense.
case that I regard any archetypal manifestation whatsoever as equally religious. So that's not a real claim. Let me give you an example. For example, there's a sub-narrative in the story of Moses where Moses is rewarded with a glimpse of God. Okay, and that's one of the ways that God is characterized in the Old Testament stories.
Yes.
Now, Moses is a faithful servant of God and a good man. At least that's the case within the...
Hang on, we got a super chat from Matthew. Thank you, Matthew. Why is it the loser of any argument seems to be the one who talks the quickest? Because it's the one with the most hubris, I think.
The confines of the story.
One possible interpretation.
It's the case within the confines of the story, obviously.
Well, not obviously. When we look at the Bible can't precisely say anything because there are so many different exegetical and hermeneutic views of this particular book, and that everybody has everybody has disagreed historically on, it seems like, even the most benign detail about a book this big. And it seems like you can only say that the Bible says something if you first presuppose that it's univocal.
So your claim essentially is that Moses in the Old Testament plays the role of a villain or is irrelevant? Because the alternative claim is that he's good.
Know, because we can't talk to those authors.
How about it doesn't matter?
We're going to start with the presupposition that there's nothing I can say about any of these stories that you're not going to disagree with from the perspective that there are multiple potential competing claims, then I can't speak with you. So
we also have a short time here, so I want to get to the core of what you're arguing here, and I'd love if we could...
The core of what I'm arguing is that atheists reject God, but they don't understand what they're rejecting.
What do you
I'm trying
think
to give you an
God
example
is?
of what's being rejected and its complexity. Okay, so God rewards Moses with a glimpse of the divine. So this is a definition of the God that atheists are hypothetically rejecting.
A possible one.
I said I didn't say the. I said
Right.
Wow.
Therapy has always been such a scary idea to me because I simply did not know where to get started. I didn't know how to find...
Okay. So despite the fact that Moses is a stellar character and he's had a long and difficult life and can withstand a lot of difficulty and travail, God puts him between two cliffs. So he can just see a crack of what's in front of him. And when God walks by, he allows him...
Jordan, if someone is rejecting the Bible as the way, the truth, and the light, then what the fuck does the story of Moses have to do with anything? Atheists do not believe the Bible is the word of God. So saying to them, do you really understand the story of Moses? It's like, it's the most nonsensical argument. It's not even grappling with the argument that they're actually making. Like, why couldn't Jordan Peterson just say to this kid, bro, what made you be an atheist? Like, honestly, why couldn't he just say, why are you an atheist? What, like, approach it from, if I was in Jordan Peterson's shoes, what I would have done when that kid came up is say, you obviously spent a great deal of time studying Christianity and you thought you had a spiritual calling at one point. What happened to you? What changed your perspective? Why did you go from being in the seminary to being an atheist? Explain your point of view to me, because it's like there's no curiosity in any of this. Like, Jordan Peterson is coming in with these preconceived. This is what bothers me about these types of formats and why I would never, ever, ever do something like this, because it's like there's no human curiosity. There's no intellectual curiosity about what these people actually believe. It's just, how can I outmaneuver the person I'm talking to try to own someone for internet clout? And it's so gross.
To see his back. Okay, so the implication of that story is that the divine is fundamentally unknowable. It's a pinnacle experience, and that
I don't believe the divine is fundamentally
have
unknowable.
to be shielded from a comprehensive vision of the basis of reality. Well, that's not the God that's defined in that manner, right? It's not a simple personification. It's not a simple old man in the sky. It's something that in its essence is unknowable and overwhelming. And that isn't, in my experience, the God that's defined by atheists who are attempting to undermine the story. I mean, it's the same claim, for example, that you're a finite creature and that you face something that in the final analysis is unknowable, and that you have to establish a relationship with it regardless of your inability to perceive or even withstand perceiving the whole.
What is he even
is there
talking
a problem
about?
with that?
This doesn't even make sense.
I mean, the problem is that when we look at, famously, when you've been asked, do you believe in God? The question becomes, what do we mean by God? And in the Bible, it's not even clear the biblical authors know what God is, because Yahweh has historically emerged from.
Someone needs to ask, I really hope someone in this debate says, Jordan, what do you mean when you say God?
An early storm god, a deity that doesn't exhaust the category of deity, and that has changed over the Old Testament. Does God have physicality? Does God not have physicality? It seems like, yes, if you define religion to mean anybody that has an aim, anybody that looks at the unknown, anybody who wants to go from chaos to order is inherently religious, then yes. But also in the same way, I could define atheist as somebody who doesn't dogmatically believe in a religion, or somebody who doesn't regularly attend religious services or belong to a denomination. To help especially the audience kind of like boil this down, there's a lot of words there. That the central claim is that we exist somewhere between the finite and the infinite.
A central claim.
A central claim is that we exist somewhere between the finite and the infinite.
No, I said that we were finite and we had to establish a relationship with the infinite.
Yeah, then in that case, then we're all religious, but then I can do the same thing and define one particular element of atheism. It seems like we both have a reductive view of what the other side looks like, to the point where a conversation seems incoherent, and not just incoherent, but not in the way that the average Christian understands Christianity to be.
Do you have a problem?
Let's pause there. Sorry, you've been voted out by the majority.
Hey, how's it going? Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you,
David.
David, good to see you.
Tell me everything that you know about the Polynesian deity Lono.
Oh
L-O-N-O.
my God! Why?
I don't know anything about
Stupid
Polynesian
question.
deity Lono.
Stupid
So
question.
you're rejecting something without knowledge of what you're rejecting.
I'm not rejecting it.
Do
No
you
more
be-
than I'm
do
rejecting
you believe in
anything that
Lono?
I don't know anything
Do you
about.
believe in Lono?
I
Do you
fail to
believe
see
that
the
he is a
relevance of
deity
that.
that exists in the world, exists in the universe, that exists in the existence of everything? Do you believe that Lono?
See, and here is where I start to say, no matter how much of an elitist douchebag Jordan Peterson is, most atheists are just as bad. Most atheists engage in exactly the same bad faith arguments as Jordan Peterson is. And this is no offense to atheists. I don't particularly care if you're a Christian or an atheist or a spiritualist or Jewish or Muslim. I don't fucking, or Buddhist. I don't fucking care. Okay. I don't fucking care. But like, I cannot stand most atheists because they're angry, bitter people for the most part.
I'll answer that question once you answer my question, which is, do I reject everything that I'm ignorant of? Because that's your presupposition that undergirds your argument, and unless you can prove that that's valid, then there's no point.
My question is quite simple.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean it's formulated accurately.
Do you believe that Lono exists? Yes or no?
I'm not going to answer that question for the reasons I just described. You already insisted that if I reject something, that if I'm ignorant of something, I reject it. Do you think that everyone in the world has to know everything simultaneously for that to be valid and true?
I think in order for your argument to be true, in order for it to be true that we atheists don't understand what we're rejecting, then you need to also apply that to yourself and to Christians and to Muslims and to any other person on this earth, where if you don't understand what you're rejecting the belief in, then you can't reject the belief in it. That's the implication of your claim.
I didn't say that I rejected the belief in Lona. I said I didn't know who Lono was. I didn't say anything about rejecting.
That's because I've asked you several times and you haven't, but let me get to my even greater point.
Mm-hmm.
You're saying atheists don't understand what religion is or what God is in order to be able to reject it fully or completely. We have someone over here who studied it in their own way. I've studied religion. I have a degree in religious studies, specialty in Christianity and Mediterranean traditions. And further than that, beyond me, Pew Research studies suggest that atheists and agnostics actually know more about religion and about religious stories, the foundational principles, than believe.
Well, I don't trust Pew Research either, but okay. It's my birthday. Asking for our wonderful cult to send some good vibes my way this year. I need prayers. Everyone, happy birthday, LK. We appreciate you. Good vibes, prayers for you, all that stuff. Thank you for being an awesome part of the community. LK leads the writing group on Thursdays in the Discord. We very much appreciate her. H Post says, did you see that Jubilee changed the title of the video? Yep, we talked about that earlier. I actually showed screenshots of that earlier. It used to be 1 Christian versus 20 atheists. Now it's Jordan Peterson versus 20 atheists. How curious. Thank you for the super chat.
That's because they're more religious than they think they are.
Okay.
They're concerned with deep matters, and one of the defining characteristics of someone who's oriented in a religious direction is that they're concerned with deep matters.
Okay.
In fact, it's virtually definitional.
Right, but they also have to identify with a religious tradition and accept the foundational stories that go along with that.
Well, that would mean more that they're sectarian than that they're religious. And most people, for example, in the United States, deny that they're religious, but accept that they're spiritual.
Let's pause there. You've been voted out by the majority.
So you think you know
Oh my God.
Do you really?
I literally canceled YouTube Premium like 3 days ago because I wasn't really using it that much, and here we are.
Aha! Hi, nice to meet you.
How are you doing?
Good, how
What's
are you?
your name?
I'm Greg, nice to meet you.
Greg.
Okay, so I feel like you're getting at this idea of polysemy, where we have multiple related meanings for a word, right? Like, for example, a famous...
As a reminder, every time someone tries to be helpful, I can't use the Brave browser to broadcast sound on this streaming system, so that is not a possibility. Thank you.
painting...
Everyone's just going to have to survive. It's going to be the way it is.
...can be emotionally moving in that it changes my emotional state. And when I was on the highway coming here to the studio, I was physically moving. I was changing my position. If I said, I believe the Mona Lisa is very moving, and you said, you don't really understand what you're saying, it's nailed to the wall, I would say that you're the one who doesn't understand what I'm saying, not the other way around. And the way that relates to this is there are many concepts of God, and I'll admit, I find a lot of what you say about that interesting. I'm familiar with it. The idea of this kind of Jungian hierarchical thing, or as a metaphor or a symbol, or the kind of, atheist, materialist, literalist idea of a agentic, omnipotent, omniscient being that intervenes in reality, right? So when I'm saying that I reject the concept of God, I'm aware of these other definitions of God, but I think that when we use words, we tend to only imply one meaning at a time. So the same way that I would say the Mona Lisa is moving emotionally, but I would not say it's moving physically. I would say I reject the concept of God in this very literal way. But
what literal way?
The way that God is this omniscient, omnipotent, agentic, supernatural being that sent his son down and has, caused miracles and all these things like that. The idea of God is
Do you think that there's an underlying unity of things?
Could you explain that question?
Well, scientists, for example, believe that science unifies in a comprehensive theory. Do you, yes, no, or that there are multiple competing truths? Those are the options. Either things unify or there are multiple competing truths.
I know that, for example, like in physics,
Either things are unified or there are multiple competing truths. Can't we just look out into the world and know that, like, literally both those things are true?
are looking for like a theory
They're
of
not
everything.
mutually
And why do you think they're doing that?
It's interesting, it's helpful.
But they also believe that there's an underlying unity to things.
In a sense, yeah, like like the material
That
world
doesn't
and
mean
time
there's
and space are
God.
probably governed by universal laws and principles.
That doesn't mean there's
Partly
God.
that, yes, yes, but that the same thing might extend to a broader domain that would include imagination and value.
Could you help me connect
None of that has to do with
the
God.
prompt?
Well, I'm trying to define God, the God that I don't think atheists do a very good job of defining. Here's another
Jordan Peterson just brought up a number of things that literally have nothing to do with God.
question for you. What do you think guides you in your determination of whether or not what you're saying to me is true?
Can we go back? Can we stay on what we were talking about?
We are.
Okay.
You're just uncomfortable with the question.
No, I feel like
Oh
you're just kind
my
of throwing different
God.
spaghetti at the wall.
I'm not.
Okay.
I asked you a
He
very
did,
specific
actually,
question.
he did.
What
Yeah.
is it that you think guides you when you're talking to me to help you determine whether what you say is true?
Logic, memory, reasoning, sensory information.
How do you distinguish that from being governed by something that's false?
An interesting question.
How do you know the difference when you speak between what's true and what's false? So you could imagine
Infer, right? I can infer. I can.
from what principles?
So, and what are you getting at?
I'm getting at the fact that your conscience guides you. Is that reasonable?
Conscious is defined by
Conscience.
my empathy and my reason are my foundational.
Define it any way you want.
Okay, so that's how I'm defining my conscience. Is my my conscience is my sense of
Right
and
wrong.
wrong. Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah,
Where
yeah.
does that come from?
I would say that comes from an evolved capacity to empathize and a recognition of the benefits of engaging with and nurturing that capacity. And then that empathy is constrained and guided by reason, right? Like, for example, I am driving down the highway, there's a kitten in the road. I'm going to empathetically feel, oh my God, I want to save the kitten. But then reasonably, like, I'm going to get hit by a car, right? So that's sort of the process through which I make ethical decisions.
Okay,
is
how do
empathy
you-
constrained by reason?
Do you think that people can differ in their response to something empathically?
Yeah.
Is there a mediating principle that can tell you one person who's empathic and another person who's empathic that disagree, who's correct?
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think that's where we'd have to, talk it out, right? We do that in real life all the time when we have, whether that's a discussion with a friend about the right thing to do in a situation,
Does Jordan Peterson even know what the definition of empathic is?
whether that's a policy discussion about law, right? That's where we can converse with each other, think about things, explain our perspectives, and then kind of reach a conclusion, right? That I think that we do that all the time.
So Elijah, the prophet Elijah, defined God in the Old Testament as the voice of conscience within.
Okay.
That's a definition.
So you're saying by that definition of God, I guess, see, this kind of goes back to what I'm saying initially.
I'm
where,
not defining it. Elijah
okay,
defined
so
it.
as Elijah defines
It's
God.
defined that way in Jonah, too.
Okay, so as
Cardinal Newman also
got
defined it that
as,
way.
as I'm sure you know many people who defined it that way, and it's impressive. You're a very knowledgeable person.
I'm not trying to be impressive. I'm
okay.
just pointing
Oh
out to you
my
how God
God.
is defined in the Old
Okay.
Testament.
All right. So to respond to
No,
that,
no, you're not, Jordan. No, you're not. You're pointing out how some cherry-picked scholars define God. That doesn't necessarily mean that is the only version of God that exists.
there are lots of interesting ways to define God, and that goes back to my
Then,
kind of
then
opening
how do we
statement.
specify what we're arguing about?
We
You're
use
the one
context
that-
clues, or again, it goes back.
Jordan Peterson is the one who created the question. Therefore, it is Jordan Peterson's burden to define what he means by the fucking question in the first place.
To my example with the
I'm
Mona Lisa.
defining God as conscience.
Okay. So that's interesting, but then you're kind
He's
of
defining
expanding
God
the
as
meaning
conscious.
of
Conscious.
No, I'm
God.
not. That's how it's defined in the Old Testament.
Okay,
in
so-
Elijah and in Jonah.
Sure. So whoever. So
It's not whoever.
Okay.
Elijah is one of the
Okay.
major
All right.
Old Testament
All right.
prophets.
All
Right?
right.
He's equal in stature to Moses.
Okay.
Right. So it's not arbitrary.
All right. So that is interesting, but
He's talking to a room full of people who reject the Bible. They reject the Bible. Therefore, what does it matter? They reject. This is like if someone held up a book like, let's just call it the Quran. I've never read the Quran. I have no particular feelings about the Quran. But this is like if someone held up the Quran to me and said, the Quran says this about X, Y, B, and Z. I mean, that's great, but I don't believe in the Quran. I've never read the Quran. I have no concept of the Quran. I've never practiced with the Quran. I've never meditated on the Quran. I don't fucking agree with the Quran. So, like, why would it fucking matter what it says? That is not going to be a convincing argument to me because I don't put weight on that particular book. If other people put weight on that book, fine. I don't really care. But, like, you're using a book, you're using evidence that I don't agree to try to define why I'm wrong about something. It's like, bro, I don't accept the premise of your argument.
it's not relevant to the context with which I am using the term God.
It's directly relevant. Atheists reject God, but they don't
Right, but
understand
you-
what they're rejecting.
you're
You
being-
accept
You can't even
conscience as
define
a
it.
guide, and conscience is one of the defining characteristics of
I think-
God in the Old Testament.
He's
think you're
saying
being
that our
intellectually
conscience
disingenuous.
is
In what
he is.
way?
Yes,
Because-
I
100%.
asked you if you believe that conscience guided you.
You just asked me a question and then you stopped me from answering it. In this setting, you understand the way I am using the term God and belief.
Not
and
in
then
the least. I don't understand how you're using it in the least. That's why I'm trying to define it. My definition of God as conscience is a lot more precise and
Conscience.
oriented than
But-
your definition of the God that you
Are
hypothetically
you
disbelieve
serious?
in.
It's irrelevant to the fault lines of this debate.
How is it irrelevant?
Because in common parlance, when we're talking about atheist, God, belief, not belief,
I
we're
don't
not
care
talking
about common parlance. I'm trying to get to something fundamental.
Well,
just-
okay. Well, guess what? Guess what, Jordan? Guess what? Jordan Peterson has now defined that he believes that conscience is the definition of God. Every atheist in that room has now heard Jordan Peterson say, I believe that conscience is the definition of God. Ergo, therefore, they all understand what concept they're rejecting at this point. So if someone says, Jordan, I hear you saying, this is probably what I would have said to him. Jordan, I hear you saying that you believe that God is defined as conscience. I hear you. I understand that that is what you believe. And now I am fundamentally rejecting that as my definition. And that would negate Jordan Peterson's whole prompt, because his whole prompt is, you don't understand what you're rejecting. Okay, well, now you've explained it to me. You think God is consciousness. I now understand what I'm rejecting, and I am fundamentally rejecting that idea that God is defined as consciousness. Do you have another prompt that you would like to work with in terms of a definition of God? Because that doesn't do it for me, and I don't think it does it for any of the atheists in the room. Matthew, thank you for the super chat. Be cool. You're driving down a road and both a kitten appears in front of you and a dump truck in the oncoming lane. When you wake up in the morning, what decision are you thinking? You're asking me if I'm going to hit the kitten or if I'm going to drive into the oncoming lane and hit a dump truck? Fuck you, Matthew. That is an awful super chat. You're asking me to choose between driving into a dump truck and hitting a kitten. What I would do is probably try to swerve onto the grass. I would take the third option. I would swerve onto the grass or into the breakdown lane, and therefore I would avoid the lane with the dump truck, and I would also avoid the kitten, and it would be great. Or I would try to position the car to directly drive over the kitten if that was not a problem. So there was like a cliff on this side of the road, or I have to choose between that and a dump truck. I would try to position the car over the kitten and cross my fingers that I didn't hit it. I'm not driving into a dump truck. That's not going to happen.
I think your point is irrelevant to the way that people tend
Which
to use
point?
these words. Your point that there are these polysemous
I didn't make
ideas
that
of
point.
God.
You did.
I
made a specific point that God was associated with conscience.
I just feel like you kind of retreat into this semantic fog.
I'm not retreating at all. I'm
He is,
advancing,
actually, yeah,
sir.
that's-
You are retreating.
Oh my God.
Well, it was very nice to meet you. I
nice to
appreciate
meet
the
you too.
conversation.
Yeah. It's very brave of you to do this.
Thank you.
What an asshole.
My next claim is that morality and purpose cannot be found within science.
Okay.
Hey everyone, big heads up. Paleo Valley's running a sale on all their meat sticks right now. You
What
can
the
get 30
fuck?
sticks for
Ooh.
36
Meat
bucks,
sticks?
which comes
That's actually a good ad. Okay. Back to this.
What is up, Mr. Canada?
How you doing, man?
I'm doing great.
What's
How are
your
you?
name?
Brian. I think it's interesting that you say that morality and purpose can't be found in science. Actually,
No, within science.
sure.
Yeah.
Purpose, I actually grant you, because purpose is subjective, right? Unless you want to boil it down to the purpose of life is just to procreate, right? Sure, whatever. Morality is actually something that we do see. We actually have examples of Neanderthals and older individuals found in a tribe, missing an arm, missing teeth, still alive somehow in his 40s, 50s, right? Typically, you're a Neanderthal, you can't eat, you can't hunt, you die, right? But we know that members of his tribe were taking care of him, right? So we know that at some level, early in our evolutionary history, we actually developed altruism. We have examples of chimpanzees who actually have a basic understanding of fairness, right?
Actually, there is an ongoing debate about whether or not altruism is ever really altruistic, because you still get benefit when you're committing altruistic acts. So is it really altruistic?
If you give a chimpanzee 2 grapes, right, and his buddy gets 3, right, he actually freaks out, right? But you give both chimps 3 grapes and they're good. We have examples of parrots.
Except for the greedy chimps.
Except for the greedy chimps.
They want 4 grapes.
They want 4 grapes. You know, those do exist, right? But we have similar examples where we do animal tests, right? And
So morality is intrinsic.
I think.
So it precedes science.
I think that actually
right?
a better way to define it would be that social animals, which we are, right,
Yeah.
require some level of morality or
Into what? I'm not disagreeing.
Sure.
Why do they require that?
Because it's the only way that social groups can actually survive, right?
That's my point with
Sure.
regards to science. Thank you very much.
Is that
Precisely the point that
He's
you just
so
made, that
angry,
science has to
though.
exist within a moral framework that isn't in itself scientific.
how's that not scientific?
Well, because it's not derived from the scientific process, as you just
It
indicated.
doesn't
by
need to derive from
pointing
the
to-
scientific process.
Well,
It's
hang
the
on,
fact that
hang on a sec.
we are social animals, so we need that to exist as a group.
I
right?
agree, but
Sure.
you pointed to the morality of Neanderthals, to the morality of chimpanzees. They didn't derive that from science.
They don't need to. That's not how
That's
that
my
works.
point.
Science explains it. So you
No,
just,
science doesn't explain morality.
it doesn't explain how social animals would need to be.
Well, that's
altruistic.
a complicated question.
But we see it though.
Yeah, but explaining the evolution of morality and explaining morality itself aren't the same thing.
Okay, so you're asking why does this happen?
Yes, that's more accurate.
Because we're social animals. We
Yeah,
need
but there's
to be.
more to it than that.
Is there?
Sure. For example, so we're moral animals that have a sense of the future.
Sure.
Okay, that makes us unique, and that structures our morality.
No, actually, there are other animals that can predict the future. Or not,
Not
predict
really.
the future. No, tigers. Actually, there was a tiger at the SF Zoo that killed somebody. And so
Hunting
actually,
animals-
no. Kids threw shit at the tiger. The tiger actually plotted its escape, and it found the
I'm not
kids.
saying that animals can't think.
Okay.
No, but they
let's
can
pause
see
here.
the future. That's what I'm saying.
Well-
Voted out by the majority.
Thank you, man.
Good man. Yeah.
Hey, Jordan Peterson. How you doing?
How you doing, man?
My name's Luke. Nice to meet
Good
you.
to see you, Luke.
So your claim that morality and purpose can only be found in science is a little shaky because I think that your claim is really being framed to be morality and
That's
purpose can only be found
not
in
what his
religion.
claim is.
Is that how you're kind of framing it?
I would say that the domain of religion is the domain of morality and purpose. Yes, exactly. And also that science is actually structured, at least in part, technically, to eliminate such considerations from it.
If Jordan Peterson believes the domain of religion is the domain of morality and purpose, and Jordan Peterson himself cannot define what Jordan Peterson's religion is, then does Jordan Peterson have morality and purpose? Because he seems rather confused on what his religion is. So can he really have morality and purpose if he can't define what his own religion is? I feel this video is a PSA to kids to not do drugs. I mean, some drugs are okay. All right. Listen, I promise you, there's not going to be a weed smoker on this planet that's going to be as angry as Jordan Peterson is. Like, I'm just saying, like, I have never met a weed smoker that is this angry and bitter at life at all.
It's purview a priori.
Okay.
Right? That's why we define science as value-free. But that has to be wrong because scientists have to prioritize their attention towards something before they can even engage in observation.
Okay.
And that act
Benzos
of
are another
prioritization
thing.
of attention is a value-predicated act. And so I can continue. There's all sorts of things we have to assume about science before it can take place.
Okay, so what I'm specifically pointing out here is about religion in particular, since you yourself are a Christian, right?
People debate about that, and I generally don't discuss it publicly.
Okay, I understand that. And me, myself, I am a former young earth creationist fundamentalist.
Oh, yeah.
So I have experience in this. I used to run a TikTok channel directed about apologetics about the Bible, specifically in this type of facet with morality, evolution and such, and going back and forth with that. So in the Bible, it talks a lot about slavery, right?
Yes.
Yes. So in that, it teaches you how to take care of a slave. Rather than saying slavery is wrong, I think
No,
it
it
should
says
say
that in the story of Moses.
It says slavery is incorrect. It says
Well,
it's
that's
immoral.
why Moses leads his people away from slavery.
But why does the Bible predicate and tell people exactly how to take care of a slave? Isn't that immoral? Wouldn't you say that culturally we've evolved as a species, as he said earlier about empathy?
Yeah, I would say that the reason we evolved, so to speak, away from slavery was because the West was founded on Judeo-Christian morality and the presumption that every person was made in the image of God. And so slavery itself became immoral, and that was established by Protestant Christians in the UK, who then convinced the UK government for 200 years to go to war on
And
slavery.
wouldn't you say that this is about the cultural evolution of humans in general, rather than just Christianity?
No, I think it's the flowering of the ideas that were embedded in the biblical texts across long spans of time.
I feel like this is just humans editing based on the cultural evolution.
And what do you
of
mean by
morality.
just?
Just?
Yeah, just humans.
Well, humans.
Editing.
Well, based on culture and history, right? We get better.
Well, they
in-
did do it based on culture and history, but
Yes.
culture and history have their foundations too. So
Well, yeah, but we're talking about slavery. So many people bolstered it based on the
everyone,
Bible. Based on the Bible, they looked at
much
it and
less
they
true.
justified it in the United States and the Deep South. They justified slavery
Yeah, but
based
the main
on the Bible.
thrust, the main thrust of Protestant thought in particular was stringently
Yes,
against slavery,
which-
and it was about the only movement in the history
Yes.
of the human race that
Yes.
had an anti-slavery
which,
direction.
Which was driven by humans and their
That's
understanding
one
of
way of
morality.
looking at it. Well, it depends.
It's the same with women's suffrage. I mean, women's in the patriarchy.
What do you mean it was driven by humans? Humans drove slavery too.
Yes, exactly.
So there's no argument there. If slavery and anti-slavery were both driven by humans, what does your claim that they were driven by humans have to do with it?
I don't even know what the argument is. I don't even know what they're fighting about. Matthew, thank you for the super chat. Peterson went to Russia for a treatment that was unavailable in the West to save his life, yet you say he's angry at life. Matthew, listen, thank you for all the super chats. I appreciate it very much. I don't know how you can watch this video and not draw the conclusion that Jordan Peterson is angry and bitter at life. He is seething anger and resentment. He's condescending to everyone that he talks to. He's showing no intellectual curiosity at all. He's showing no intellectual integrity at all. He's acting like an elitist douchebag. Like, there is nothing in Jordan Peterson's performance that I've seen so far that tells me that he is a person that is happy with his life, because he is being just kind of a bitter bitch to every single person he talks to. And I understand he's like participating in some debate, but he didn't have to do this. He didn't have to do this. And if he was behaving responsibly like a clinical psychologist should, he would be a lot more inquisitive and a lot more curious about the questions he's asking. He's obviously miserable. He's obviously angry. He's obviously bitter. And he seems to be blaming every other person that he interacts with for his own pissed off mood, when in fact, it's entirely his fault.
Evolving
There was a
morality
specific-
based on the culture that within the society that they live.
Okay,
in. So
fine.
with
I think
women's
that did
suffrage as well
happen.
as a very similar topic in the Bible, there are denominations in Christianity such as Pentecostal movement, which do bolster women to be pastors, right? Which I think that's a great thing to do. But most like to disregard
Where do you
women.
think the idea that human beings were sufficiently equal to all vote and not be slaves came from?
Humans.
Yeah, but so did the idea of slavery.
So did the
that's
idea of God.
Fine, but what's
Yes.
your point? Like, you're not making an argument. You're just saying all thoughts come from humans,
Yes.
regardless of the thoughts.
It's not driven by a higher power. It's driven on our experiences
Define
as
higher.
humans, which is what is best for all people.
Is it driven by conscience?
It could be. Which conscious is also something that has evolved over time. And I think that's
What's
something
the
that does evolve with morality and empathy.
Okay, I don't understand the point that you're making.
My point is that God influenced slavery. People looked at the Bible and went, this is moral because God says so, just like women's suffrage.
There's lots
and
of
just like homosexuality.
All human societies were slave owning, so you
Yes.
can't blame that on the Bible.
If humanity decided.
Oh wait, address that first.
What, about
all
slavery?
human societies were slavers, so you can't blame that on the Bible.
Well, you can say it bolstered
Can
it.
feel as
Well,
negative
not if you look
vibes.
at the broad
It
sweep
can.
of history, because it was the Protestant Christians
based
in
on
the
their
UK.
interpretation of the Bible,
It was the Protestant
which
Christians.
evolves over time.
Let's pause there. You've been voted out by the majority.
All right. Well, it was great talking with you,
nice
sir.
talking to you.
Yeah.
Too.
Dr. Peterson?
Good to see you, man.
Pleasure.
What's your name?
Brian. So the first thing I would like to say is I would like to engage in this discussion in a symbiotic manner. I would not like to engage where there is one clear winner and one clear loser. Emotions are activated and ultimately comes about ego. So I'm just saying I'm really trying to understand your position, and I would just like you to really try to understand my position.
Deal.
Okay, sounds good. With that, if you're saying that morality and purpose cannot come from science, is the opposite of that true, that morality and purpose can only come from God?
That's a way of defining it, yes.
Okay.
That's right, that's good. So I would say that with regard to the first claim, say, atheists don't understand what they're rejecting, because I would say, by definition, God is the unity upon which moral claims are based. That's a definition, right?
Okay, if there is a God, what is the purpose of life?
Well, in the Christian
Experience.
tradition, the purpose of life is to engage in voluntary, upward, self-sacrifice, so that the kingdom of heaven can be established on earth.
So you're trying to make it to heaven and avoid hell.
Yes, that's
What
a
if
good way.
you don't
That's a
believe
good
hell
way of thinking
exists?
about
What
it.
is the purpose of heaven? Do you understand?
Well,
so here's the deal.
At
We
minimum,
can
at
get
minimum, it's
into
the
an
opposite
infinite.
of endless suffering. How about
We
that?
can, okay, and so should we not try to achieve infinite suffering on planet Earth? And if we can achieve infinite suffering on planet Earth
mean
without
avoiding-
God,
you mean avoiding
avoiding it, if we can do that without God, then does that defeat your claim?
Well, yeah, except that it doesn't. You circumvented my initial definition, because I said that by definition, God was the unified source of morality. And so if we engage in a moral
And
exercise,
when you're talking about morality, though, when you really reverse engineer it and you get
Does Jordan Peterson believe that people cannot behave morally if they're not Christian? And if the answer to that is yes, then why won't Jordan Peterson admit to being a Christian? Because I don't believe that I don't believe hell exists. I believe we all go to the same place when we die. You can call it heaven, you can call it whatever. It doesn't really matter. I believe we all go to the same place when we die. Hell doesn't exist. We are not living life to avoid eternal damnation in hell. And so, is Jordan Peterson saying that I have no sense of morality because I don't ascribe to a Christian worldview? And if that's the case, why can't Jordan Peterson admit that he is a Christian?
get it down to its root. You're a psychologist. It really seems like it just has to deal with motivation. People are saying there is a God. There
it's
is
more specific than that.
Well, so let me ask you this. So if there is a God and there is a moral code and it doesn't come at your benefit, are you going to follow it?
It depends on how you define your benefit. If you define your benefit,
if it's going to come at your expense, would you still
Define
follow
your
it?
expense.
If God came down and said, here is my moral code and you should follow it, but even if you follow it, you are still going to end up in hell, are you going to follow it?
well, that was the question that was put to Job and Christ, right? Because they
okay,
were
but-
required.
but
hang on, I'm answering your question. They were required to withstand trials that would break anyone and maintain their upward orientation regardless.
And they did that with
Yeah.
the motivation of believing that this omnipotent, all-loving God would somehow turn it into a benefit. So they still did it solely for their benefit. So
No,
when you,
not, well,
yes,
let's
they
define,
did. Yes,
hang
they did.
Hang on,
If-
let's define benefit. Like, if I did something for your sister, would that be to your benefit? Like, how are you defining your benefit? Do you mean one of your whims gratified now? Or do you mean you and everyone you love and know over some reasonable span of time? Like, what
So
do you mean by you?
when you're talking about whims, I think you're talking about something that's more dopamine. When you're talking about morality, you're talking about something that's more serotonin and more ultimately satisfying. So you and I agree on a lot. I mean, when it comes to talking about how men should be masculine and things of that nature, you and I are 100% in agreement. We just don't agree on the justification that God is the only thing that provides morality.
It's not a justification, it's a definition.
What's the difference in? between a definition and a justification. I mean, it's ultimately
No, I see.
psychologically the same thing.
Well, we have to define what we're talking about before we can just debate.
Okay, well,
right?
so here's
so
my
I
position.
said that God, among other things.
I'm actually a non-theist. I'm not an atheist. I believe the human condition is one of uncertainty. And what that means is that I don't believe that you can conclude there is a God with certainty, and I don't believe that you can conclude that there is a God without in the same position. Now, with that, I don't care. I still wake up every day and I have motivation to be a moral person.
Define moral.
Moral, what I ought to do.
Okay, and how do you
and
come
what
to that
I ought to
conclusion?
do, ultimately, it comes down to what not just benefits me, but what benefits the entire planet, what it benefits the entire system. I think that your entire moral perspective comes from linear thinking. And when you look at the reality of the universe, it's actually more so holistic. So when you look at how Aristotle defined God, when he said that there had to be an unmoved move.
Just as an aside, I literally don't believe anyone who says that my morality is what I ought to do for the betterment of everyone around me. And the reason I don't believe these people fundamentally is none of these people act in accordance with that belief. So is that belief actually real? That they believe that they should act in a way that is of service to people around them? Okay, how do you actually do that? What percentage of the time are you doing that? I don't know.
Or an uncaused cause. He was defining God from a linear perspective, and you do the same with morality, and you do the same with purpose.
How does my
I
definition
reject
of
that.
morality? How does my definition of morality hypothetically differ from yours?
Because you're saying that there's something that exists in a vacuum, that it exists in and of itself, and nothing in the universe exists in a vacuum. Nothing exists in and of itself. It's a whole systems-based morality. It's a systems-based reality.
Is there a hierarchical
and that is
structure?
what the quantum.
Is there a hierarchical structure? Are some things more important than others?
Are some things? I think that some things lead to more benefits than
Then,
others.
by your own definition, some things are more important than others.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay,
What is
pause there. You've been voted out by the majority.
I want to see the black girl. Black girl. Black girl. Black girl.
How you doing?
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
I guess since you said morality and purpose cannot be found in science, it would just depend on like what you're referencing. If you're saying a description of your psychological preferences would be considered within science, sure. But I don't think that you have to say that it comes from science in order to be like an atheist. As an agnostic atheist, I don't know if God exists and I don't believe that a God exists. And the only ones that I would really reject would be like the all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good, perfect notion of God that plenty of Christians like prescribe themselves. So I guess
How is that relevant to this claim?
you're basing a position of morality and purpose in some like notion of God that isn't the same type of notion of God that typical Christians would prescribe. Your notion of God is
What typical Christians?
Yeah, typically when I talk to Christians, they say that they believe in an all-knowing.
How about Cardinal Newman, who defined God as conscience? He was a major influence on all of Catholic social theory. How about that Christian?
Sure. So do you believe in the all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good notion of God?
What do you mean by believe?
Do you think it to be true?
That's the circular definition. What do you mean when you
What?
say you believe?
How is that circular?
Jordan Peterson, do you believe this? What do you mean by believe? That you think it is true. That is a circular definition. How the fuck is that a circular definition of belief? Can Jordan Peterson actually articulate what he believes or no? Does Jordan Peterson believe anything? That he would, like, he wants to be like, I would stake my career on not telling a lie and all this fucking bullshit. It's like, bro, what do you believe? If you're going to go on the internet and have debates about religion, then you should damn well be prepared to say, this is what I believe. This is my line in the sand. This is what I think is true. And whether or not other people agree with you really shouldn't matter at all. If you believe, if that is what you believe, then that is what you believe. But why is he such a pussy that he can't even say, this is what I believe?
Because you added no content to the answer by substituting the word true and believe.
I said, you think it to be true.
All right. So if you believe something, you stake your life on it.
What do you mean by that?
You live for it and you die for it. That's what I mean by that. It isn't something that you say. It isn't something that's associated with logical consistency. It's not declarative. It's not propositional. It's not a figment of your imagination. It's the presupposition of your attention and your action. And you're either fragmented, in which case you worship multiple gods, or there's some unity at the bottom of it that makes you an unstoppable force.
Okay, so you're saying that you don't believe something if you wouldn't die for it?
Not really, no.
Okay. So
How would you define belief? Something you say?
I guess why I explain. Like, I could believe it is the case that this pen exists, but if someone like threatened my life, right, I would lie in order to be able to save my life, right? Like I think you would do that too. You wouldn't lie to save your
Don't
life.
be so sure.
You wouldn't lie to save your life?
How much do you know about me? I didn't lie to save my career. I didn't lie to save my clinical practice.
Would you lie to like save your children, your mom, your dad?
I don't think lying would save them.
No, can there ever be a circumstance logically that lying could save someone?
Yeah, and if you're steeped in sin, you're likely to live in circumstances like that.
I'll give you an example. If you're like in like Nazi Germany, and it is the case that
He's hissing. Jordan Peterson is hissing.
there's like Jewish people in your attic and you're trying to protect them,
example.
would you lie to like the Nazis?
I would have done everything I bloody well could, so I wouldn't be in that situation to begin with. It's a hypothetical, and it's not answerable.
Hypotheticals?
No, I can't answer a hypothetical like that because it's far. Look, don't play games.
I'm not playing games.
Yes, you are. If you present me with an intractable moral choice that's stripped of context and you back me into a corner, you're playing game. I just told you I would do everything that I could to make sure that I'm never in that situation. By the time you've got there, you've made so many mistakes that there's nothing you can do that isn't a sin.
Being born in Nazi Germany and trying to protect people that you care about, like there could be a Jewish friend that you have and you want to protect them.
I think you should just give up on that line of questioning.
Give up on just like trying to clarify your position? Because you don't like, are you like uncomfortable with me asking this question? It's just a basic hypothetical. Like I could ask you.
It's just a basic hypothetical.
Like,
where you put Jews' lives at stake in Nazi Germany, that's just a basic hypothetical.
Obviously you would lie in that scenario to save their life, but you're like not trying to answer this question for some reason.
I just told you why.
Are you anti-fascist? Like, so you're
why
anti-fascist?
are you asking that?
I was just asking, just clarifying. But like, okay, again, you're not answering this hypothetical because you know it shows that you clearly would lie to save someone's life.
I'm answering it in a manner you don't find acceptable.
Obviously, because I care about truth.
I wouldn't be in that scenario.
Obviously, right? Logically, because that's already happened. Like that's in the past. You don't have a time travel device. We're bringing this logical hypothetical up to show you.
A lot of people believe that they wouldn't be in scenarios that they end up in. And I think, honestly, you know what? This kid is a liberal douchebag, but the line of questioning that he's asking Jordan Peterson is complete. Jordan Peterson is the one who came out and said, you would die for a belief. And then the kid's like, really? I would die for a belief? I'm not going to die for a belief that this pen is a real thing. You know? I mean, I'm not going to die for that. I mean, I'm sure all of us can think of beliefs that we have that we're like, yeah, okay, I believe that thing, but am I going to actually put myself in a position where I'm going to, you know, commit? Is that the hill that I'm going to die on? No, it's not the hill that I'm going to die on. And so Jordan Peterson is the one that put that out, saying, if I believe something is true, then I would literally die for that thing. And so the kid is like, okay, Jordan, so you believe that you would never tell a lie. If you had to lie to protect the life of a Jewish friend during the Holocaust, would you do it, or would you die for that belief? It is a perfectly valid question to ask. The reason Jordan Peterson doesn't like it is it completely undermines his entire fucking argument and moral position. Rottweiler, I won't lie no matter what is performance, and Peterson has just been proven to be performing his morality. That's exactly right. He's performing his morality. Not all moral calculus are Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. That's exactly right. Listen, man, I believe that crystals have energy. I believe that crystals have energy. If someone put a gun to my head and said, Karlyn, are you willing to die for the belief that crystals have energy that you can feel? I'm going to be like, nah, crystals are just rocks. They're pretty rocks. That's all they are. That's all I care about. It's just they're pretty rocks. Because I'm like, it's an absurd notion. Hey, Bot, thanks for being a member of the channel. Would you lie and say mayo is amazing to save your life? Yes, I would. Mayo is a disgusting food. Mayonnaise is literally terrorism. If you ever bring mayonnaise near me, I will excommunicate you from my life. It is awful. But if I had a gun to my head and they said, Karlyn, in order to save your life, you need to declare that mayonnaise is the most amazing thing that's ever been made. Yeah, I'm going to say that mayonnaise is the most amazing thing ever. Yes, I am. 100%. 1000%. I am not dying on the mayonnaise hill.
That in some circumstances that do happen within the real world, you would lie to save people's lives. So your definition of truth isn't actually how we're typically using it. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to muddy the waters when I ask you, like, do you believe this? Do you think this to be true? So you don't actually have to answer the questions. And plenty of Christians don't like that because they clearly see that you don't really want to be associated with Christianity.
I can imagine that I was in a situation where the best I could do as a consequence of my previous mistakes was to tell the least amount of lie I could manage. But that would likely indicate that I had made all sorts of catastrophic errors on my way there.
So you would lie to save someone's life. So again, you do believe it to be true in that circumstance, even though you lied in that scenario. So
not
clearly that's
without the context that I put it in.
You were not willing to die for it. You were not willing to let other people die for it. So that's not what you see to be true then, seemingly.
You're doing exactly what I said you were doing at the beginning of the conversation. You're generating an impossible, restricted, hypothetical with no precursors to back me into a
How
corner.
is it possible? Is there something contradictory about it?
That kid did a great job.
My next claim is that
that kid was a liberal douchebag, but he did a great job. Liberal douchebag W. Matthew, thank you for the super chat. Would you lie to your nieces and nephews if they ask you if Santa was real? Probably. Well, okay. So what? Hang on though. The presupposition to this is that I believe that lying is the greatest moral sin. I don't believe that lying is the greatest moral sin. That's not to say I run around lying all the time. There are very few situations I lie in. But do I believe that lying is a mortal sin, or like is this a moral question for me? It's really not. There are some scenarios where it's perfectly fucking fine to lie. Do I make that a habit in my personal relationships? No, because in my personal relationships, I want to be trustworthy. And so in my personal relationships, it is very, very rare that I'm going to lie to someone that I have a personal relationship with. But there are many, 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 many circumstances in which lying is perfectly acceptable. If I have nieces and nephews, or in my case, I had cousins. I had like 8,000 fucking cousins, okay? I guess. If I have little cousins running around and they're like 5, 6 years old and they're all excited about Christmas and they're all excited about Santa, am I going to say to them, Santa's not real? No, of course I'm fucking not. They're little kids. Let them be happy. Let them have that joyous experience in their life. In that case, lying is perfectly acceptable. It doesn't hurt anyone. Like, who the fuck cares? You're allowing them to hold on to some childhood wonder. I think that that's probably a good thing. So again, the presupposition for your question is that I think that lying is always morally bad, and I don't. So thank you for the money, though. I appreciate it.
Everybody worships something, including atheists, even though they might not know it.
Black girl, black girl, black girl,
I'm Zena.
black girl.
So I want to start off with like defining terms.
Yep.
How do you define worship?
Prioritize.
Prioritize. So almost like having a preference over something rather than the other.
It's a hierarchy of preferences.
Yeah.
And you use it to direct your attention.
Right.
So whatever you're attending to, you're worshiping.
Right. So I've kind of become a little bit familiar with your idea of like this value-laden hierarchy.
Yeah.
Wait.
Right. And you kind of...
Jordan Peterson believes that you're worshiping whatever you prioritize in your life. That's an interesting definition of worshiping.
Posit that at the bottom of this hierarchy, or you call it top or bottom, I suppose. Right. At the bottom of this hierarchy, this foundational priority in your life is going to be considered God.
That's
that
right.
Correct?
Yes.
Right. I'm trying to imagine a situation in which could there be that someone has a priority at their foundation that is different from someone else's?
Oh, definitely.
Right. So we can have different conceptions of God.
That's why we fight.
Right. So essentially, there's not one God, but there are multiple gods, and these gods exist in some realm of truth. Like it's true that this person has one God and it exists.
Yeah, probably better to think about it as multiple values, but that there's a hierarchy of values with something at the bottom.
Right, but at the bottom is God, and
That's a definition, yeah.
Yeah, so at the bottom is God, and there can be multiple people with different conceptions of God, and they're each valid in being called God. So there are multiple gods that exist.
It depends on what you mean by valid. So far, so good, but it depends on what you mean by valid, because I would say that some foundational conceptions don't play out when they're implemented. So if you put the wrong thing at the foundation, you end up in hell, for example. That's what happens in totalitarian states.
Okay.
Yeah?
So you're saying...
So they're not all equal. Like all foundational principles are not equal, even though they might be equally foundational. Right.
So what makes one kind of foundational
you get to
tenet
pick what you
better
prioritize.
That's an excellent question. Iterability. Imagine that you play a game with someone and you're a kid, and it's fun. So then you play again and again and again.
So repetition.
It's playability across multiple iterations. So then you have a friend, and a friend is better than having a game, right? So that's one. Breadth of application is another. So if it's just for me now, it's not as good as something that would be benefit to both of us across time.
Right. So we're explaining like characteristics that can be applied to like these types of like foundational values. But why is it that this iterability makes it better, and what does better mean?
Well, one hallmark of better is likely to be selected voluntarily. So it's invitational.
Another descriptive kind of quality. So we're talking about characteristics that in some type of system with a goal and output being like, we could maybe say happiness, right? Or some type of
harmony.
Harmony,
Yeah,
right?
that's better. Not happiness precisely, because it's too short term.
Exactly.
Mhm.
So as someone who is an atheist, right, I can explain that within a system, there are things that we can see as better or worse to meet this goal or meet this output. But what we're interested in, though, is what could make these things, regardless of any system, right?
Well, imagine that you set up a system and you implement it, and it produces the opposite results to which you intend. Okay, that's not a good system.
Exactly.
Right, so the foundational principles are lacking, because when you implement them, the game degenerates instead of moving towards the aim.
Right.
Okay,
So we're talking about within a system. When we talk about something being moral, right, just absolutely moral, it means that without a system, right, this thing is simply moral with no reason. Like, stance independent, this thing is good. So I'm trying to figure out if such thing can exist. And if so, do you believe that these things are moral in of themselves, like self-evidently moral, or are they moral in accordance with the system?
I can't define them any more accurately than I already did, really.
Okay. In regards to morality, when we talk about the divine, when we talk about God and religion, these moral tenets and religion, right, and God exist as good because it is God, right? So it's self-evident, right? Without any kind of goal or output, this thing is good. So I want to figure out how...
There's an element of that that's true. So, for example, in the story of Job, Job is unfairly tortured in consequence of a bet between God and Satan. And so Job is emblematic of someone who's being hurt for no apparent reason. Okay, so Job's response to that is that he refuses to lose faith in himself, and he refuses to lose faith in the ultimate goodness of being. Okay, and those are axiomatic decisions. They're not exactly evidence dependent, because he is suffering. There's an arbitrariness in that that's reminiscent of what you claim.
So I'm essentially trying to figure out, do you believe that something can be good, like stance independently, something that can be good?
I don't know what you mean by stance independent.
Okay, so
you
I
mean
mean
independent of people?
Independent of people. We can use that, or more so, I want to be more specific. Something that can be good, right, regardless of any end goal. It's just good.
No, I think good is tied up with goal.
Goal, okay. I completely agree. So in a sense, this is why...
That's why the religious goal in Christianity is the establishment of the kingdom of heaven on earth. It's goal dependent.
Okay, right.
And so it's in reference to a goal.
So,
or the goal would be the
but
imitation of Christ.
Someone's goal, right, can be something that doesn't encompass being in congruence with God or being with God.
No, the thing that they want to be in congruence.
Oh, right, okay.
That's right. That's right. That's good. That's great. The thing they want to be in congruence with is fundamentally equivalent to their God.
So what makes someone a Christian and what makes someone not a Christian? What makes, that's what I'm trying to figure out. Because
that's a good question.
Yes.
Yeah, well, probably the deepest answer to that is willingness to shoulder your cross voluntarily and trudge uphill regardless of circumstances.
Okay, so someone can believe in... Someone
What? Hang on. What? Jordan Peterson believes that the fundamental nature of being a Christian is that you will drag a cross uphill voluntarily. I don't know. Maybe I'm a little old school, and maybe the Christians in the chat can correct me, but I kind of think the fundamental element of being a Christian is that you believe that Christ died for your sins and then was resurrected and is the Son of God. Like, am I wrong? Am I wrong about that? That, like, that is kind of like the fundamental defining characteristic of being a Christian is that you believe that Christ is the Son of God and he died for your sins and then was resurrected. Like, I mean, I don't think it has anything to do with whether or not you're personally willing to trudge up a hill. It has to do with the fundamental nature of Christ.
God, because in your definition, your first preference, that is God, right? So someone can believe in God, right, and not be a Christian, right?
Yeah, well, there's a statement that Christ makes in the Gospels. He says, not everyone who says, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven.
So not that they're saying that they believe in God, but they just...
I know, but that's why I'm saying this to you, is that Christ himself points out that there's a difference between people who say they believe and people who act it out. And the fundamental issue is the action rather than the stated belief.
But he also says that, you know, to be saved, right, you must believe God has died for your sins or that God has resurrected in some way. So it's like, I don't necessarily think that we can take from the Bible and say that, like, acting in accordance with God necessarily means, or acting in accordance with, you know, the principles of God, like, for example, sacrifice, like you talk about, means that you are Christian. I don't see how you can get that from that interpretation and then, you know, kind of justify it as the truth.
I don't think that the fact that you sacrifice is sufficient to make you Christian.
So can we repeat once again what you believe makes someone Christian?
There's many things, but one of the most fundamental is that you believe that the cosmos itself is founded on the principle of voluntary self-sacrifice.
No.
Best founded. Let me offer you a contrary example.
No, Jordan, no, wrong. First of all, the idea that the cosmos was founded on the idea of self-sacrifice is retarded. That is so... What the fuck has this... Okay. I'm not. I have nothing. I'm actually blown away that that is his definition of what it means to be a Christian, because it is so unhinged and stupid that I can barely handle it. Okay.
So I could assume that power rules. And so that my assumption would be, if I can make you do it, I win. Right, and I can found a whole society, and that happens a lot, by the way. And that's also how societies tend to degenerate. And so that would be a society that was founded on the principle that you get to sacrifice and I don't have to. Right, now,
Jordan Peterson has no effing idea what he actually believes. This is the big takeaway from this. He has no clue what he believes. For his years of philosophizing on the internet, for pretending that he is the moral authority on the internet, for pretending that everyone should listen to him for how to live their life. He has no effing clue what he actually believes, and he also doesn't understand other people and what their belief systems are. Yeah, see, this is a thing. He is you're 100% right. He is revealing so much about himself, and he's not even aware of what he's revealing. Matthew, thank you for the super chat. Fundamental rule: by believing in Christ, you can, like him, beat death as he did. I don't know about that, Matthew, but again, I do very much appreciate the super chat. Thank you.
Contrary to that would be something like, you give up voluntarily and with courage all the things you need to situate yourself properly in relationship to the future and other people. Right. So then there's a harmony. That's why I talked about harmony earlier.
So you navigate your life, right, in accordance kind of to this principle of self-sacrifice. Can I say it in that way?
Yes, you can definitely say it that way. That's exactly right.
What has Jordan Peterson sacrificed for other people? How has Jordan Peterson engaged in acts of self-sacrifice?
And navigate is the right term.
So someone does not have to have any awareness of Christ, of the story of Jesus, but let's say 60% of their actions, right, or more, whatever kind of metric you want to use, are in line with this self-sacrificial.
So the Christian thinkers of the Middle Ages dealt exactly with that problem when they were talking about the pre-Christian philosophers, for example. And they noted the similarity, let's say, between pre-Christian Greek thought and later Christian thought, and presumed that there were moral actors outside the Christian domain.
Right. So is that person Christian, though?
Well, to some degree, again, that's a matter of definition, because they wouldn't be proclaiming Christian propositions, but they're acting out the pattern, right? So imagine that full Christianity would involve a dozen things, and you can imagine someone who knows nothing of Christianity, say, acting out 8 of them.
Right.
So then they'd be 8/12 Christian or something like that.
Christian. Well, but to be like a full Christian, how can someone say I am Christian? Like I am Christian, not 8/12, but Christian.
Well, I hesitate to do that personally, because I think it's the kind of goal that you be very careful about proclaiming. The technical.
But belief is not necessarily, to be mostly Christian, belief is not necessary. 8/12s or, right?
Well, it depends on what you mean by belief. See, because I would say that acting out the pattern is the deepest form of belief. Now, you could add to that what you say. So, maybe in the optimal situation, how you act and what you imagine and what you say, they're the same. Right? But you can imagine a hypocrite who says all sorts of wonderful things and does nothing. And you could imagine another person who acts in a very positive manner, but proclaims nothing.
So what I'm kind of seeing is like a descriptive, a really comprehensive but descriptive analysis of human action, human thought, and by which we can characterize people and put people in boxes. But I don't see...
Why in boxes?
When I say in boxes, I mean like I can categorize you based on your actions, not based on necessarily what you say, but based on your actions that you are more so or less so Christian, right? Things like that, right? So we can categorize people as Christian.
Well, I would say more or less voluntarily self-sacrificing.
But that's also what we came to, though, is that someone can be like 60% or 70% Christian based on simply just acting in that way.
Yeah, Richard Dawkins is like that.
I watched that debate.
Let's pause there. We've been voted out by the majority.
Very good.
Thank you so much.
Really, very thoughtful.
Oh, this kid. Yes.
Hey, Dr. Peterson.
How you doing?
Danny, nice to meet you.
What's your name?
Danny.
Danny.
You're saying atheists worship things or people or places, whatever. Can you just be very clear about your definition of worship again?
Attend to, prioritize, and sacrifice for.
Okay, that's it. That's your understanding of worship.
Well, I can flesh it out, but that'll do for the time we have.
Okay. Do Catholics attend to Mary?
Oh, yes.
Okay. So do they fit that description of worship?
Yes.
So you would say Catholics and other people that revere Mary, like the Eastern Orthodox tradition, worship Mary?
Well, they might not put her in the highest
But you would
place.
put it that way.
No.
You just said it. Now you're taking it back
There's
now?
still a hierarchy.
Okay, there's a hierarchy, but within the
There's something at the top.
All right, you can worship things
Mary is
below.
quite a ways up the hierarchy, but not at the top.
Let's go over your definition of worship again. What's your definition of worship?
Prioritize.
Attend to.
Attend to.
Prioritize.
Do Catholics
sacrifice for?
What do Catholics attend to? Do they prioritize Mary over all other human beings?
No, I didn't say overall, did I? I didn't add that to my definition.
You understand?
I said there was a hierarchy as well.
You attend to
So you can attend to something trivially, or you can attend to it deeply.
Okay, now you're adding stuff to the definition, but your original
I
definition.
added the hierarchy part at the beginning.
Are you
just
familiar?
didn't understand it.
Are you familiar with the Immaculate Conception?
You just didn't understand me. You're
Because you
just
go to a
not
Catholic
trying to
church, I'm sure you've
understand
attended
me.
recently. You're interested in Catholicism, aren't you?
Sure.
All right. Are you familiar with their doctrines?
Somewhat.
Okay, you're
Their
familiar.
doctrines are
How do
very
they
deep.
regard Mary?
Why are you asking me that?
Because you're a Christian.
You say that. I haven't claimed that.
Oh, what is this? Is this Christian versus atheist?
I don't know.
You don't know where you are right now.
Don't be a smartass.
Well,
and I mean
either
it,
you're a
'cause I
Christian
won't
or you're
talk
not.
to you if you're a smartass.
Oh, either you're a Christian or you're not. Which one is it?
I could be either of them, but I don't have to tell you.
You don't have to tell me. I was under the impression
private.
I was invited to talk to a Christian. Am I not talking to a Christian?
No, you were invited to.
I think everyone should look at the title of the YouTube channel. You're probably in the wrong YouTube video.
You're really quite something. You are.
Aren't I? But you're really quite nothing. Right? You're not a Christian.
Okay, I'm done with him.
Why does Jordan Peterson get to stop the debate when he's losing? That kid was a champion. I'm sorry. That kid owned Jordan Peterson all over the internet because Jordan Peterson got butthurt, and I fucking hate the word butthurt, but I'm going to use it because I just can't think of a better word at this particular moment. Jordan Peterson got butthurt because the kid demanded to know whether or not Jordan Peterson was a Christian, and Jordan Peterson couldn't answer that question. He just shouldn't have done this debate. Why did Jordan Peterson even do this?
Hi there.
Hi, nice
What's
to
your
meet you.
name?
Gerard.
Hello, Gerard.
Nice to meet you, sir. So
Gerard.
you said that worship is when you prioritize and sacrifice for something, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
But there's a hierarchy in there.
Sure. So I prioritize and sacrifice for my wife more than I would prioritize and sacrifice for a random person on the street, right?
Probably. Yeah.
Presumably. Do I worship
I don't know.
my
I've
wife?
seen some pretty bad marriages.
Assuming a good marriage, are you saying I worship my wife?
I'm trying to define worship.
That's what I'm asking.
You
so prioritize and sacrifice.
The higher it is in the hierarchy, the more what you're doing is akin to worship. But even in your trivial acts of attention, you're prioritizing and partaking in worship, even if you don't know it.
So I am
And it's partly, well, with regard to your wife, say. So why do you value your wife? You do value your
Yes,
wife.
I love her. So I prioritize and I sacrifice for her.
Right. So
Hey guys, by Jordan Peterson's definition of worship, I'm pretty sure we all worship socialists based on the amount of attention that we give socialists and the amount of time we prioritize for socialists on this channel and the amount that we discuss socialism. I'm pretty sure Jordan Peterson thinks we worship at the altar of socialism based on this really absurd definition.
that's within the confines of.
Hey, Matthew, and again, I say this with all due respect of all the super chats you've sent me. If your beliefs are personal and you don't want to talk about your beliefs in public, then do you know what you don't do? You don't go to be in a massive YouTube video where you are presented as a Christian, because that was the original title of the video, debating 20 atheists. If your beliefs are so deeply held and so personal to you and you just don't want the internet to know about your beliefs, then maybe don't participate in the video where you're debating atheists about the concept of religion. Because I think you forfeit your ability to not tell anyone what you believe the minute that you agree to a debate in which you are presented as a Christian, even though you don't want to admit it, to a room full of atheists.
Of love, let's say.
Sure.
What else does it serve?
What else does what serve?
Your love in your marriage?
I mean, I am married to my wife because I love her. That's also why I prioritize and sacrifice for her. I certainly wouldn't think I worship her, and I don't think anyone else would make that.
I'm
Are you
trying to
making
make
that
a
claim?
definition.
Okay.
Yeah, that there's a hierarchy of attentional priority, and as you move up it or down it, depending on whether you think about it as a pinnacle or a foundation, you move more towards worship. Right. So even the small things. I'll give you an example. Imagine you go on a date. Well, imagine that your aim is a long-term relationship like a marriage. Okay, now imagine that your aim is short-term sexual gratification. Your pattern of attention is going to vary during the date, depend on your ultimate end. That's the hierarchy. The way that you attend to your wife is dependent on your ultimate aims, even if you don't know it.
So at what point is it worship? Because it sounds like you're saying worship is almost a spectrum, right? Or it's not a binary, it's not a...
It's kind of like, that's a good question.
When is it worship as opposed to just, I love my wife?
The closer you get to the top or the bottom, the more it's more like
How
worship.
close to the top? Because I don't think I worship anything. And if you're saying I have to hit a certain threshold for it to be worship, it is possible I don't worship anything then, right?
It's not possible that you don't worship anything.
What do I worship?
Because you wouldn't attend. Well, love.
So you think I worship love?
Do you attend in consequence of love? I'm trying to define something. What do you mean worship? Well, I told you what I meant. What do you mean?
So I mean, something you worship is something that you have a reverential view for in a manner in which you believe it to be above and beyond normal things you like. Like you.
So do you have that attitude towards your wife?
I have that.
Do you
attitude.
Privilege her compared to other women?
Of course, I privilege her compared to other women, but I don't worship her. Nor does she worship me.
By the definition you just offered, yes, you do, because you just offered a definition that involved prioritization and elevation.
Well, and thinking that she is divine above and beyond what a normal natural phenomenon can be. Not other women, no, beyond any human being could ever be. I will prioritize her over any other human, but I don't think that she is.
You're making the assumption that only the thing at the top or the bottom has anything to do with worship. And I'm saying that's not true. It's a hierarchy of prioritization. And there's either something at the top or the bottom, depending on the metaphor, or you're fragmented and confused. Those are the only options.
So let's say
you're either going in many directions, or you're going in one direction.
All right, we got another super chat from Matthew. True words, but just because you defend a point does not make you a supporter of that point. It just means you understand it. Hey, Matthew, if I don't want to talk about my spiritual beliefs, I'm not going to agree to do a debate on the internet about spiritual beliefs. I think it's really unreasonable to say I should be able to go and be an arbitrary defender of Christianity, even though I don't believe in Christianity, even though I don't practice Christianity, even though I won't admit to being a Christian. In fact, I'm not going to fucking tell you what I believe because you don't deserve to know what I believe. If that's his position, he should not be doing debates about religion. Like, this is not hard. If you don't want to talk about your religious beliefs or lack thereof, if you don't want to have a serious discussion about what you actually think, then don't agree to do a debate about religion on the internet that's going to get millions of views. You are perfectly capable. Anyone is perfectly capable of practicing whatever private beliefs they want. But people who are actually serious about keeping their beliefs private don't engage in debates about religion on the fucking internet. It's that simple, bro.
Let's suppose I'm fragmented and confused. Then you agree I don't worship anything.
No, then you worship multiple things.
So what's the threshold when it's worship? Right? I prioritize a lot of stuff.
I said that the closer you get to the pinnacle, or the closer
you get, can you give me some sort of metric? How close do I got to get to this pinnacle?
Shit up.
Do you know the difference between cheap literature and deep literature?
Yes.
Oh my God.
That's the same issue. And how do you distinguish between them? What's the difference between cheap and deep?
I mean, it's really an opinion-based thing, right?
Is it? So it's just an opinion that Dostoevsky is better than a porno magazine.
Well, I've spoken to people who think To Kill a Mockingbird's cheap. It's one of my favorite books. So, I mean, people will differ on opinion.
Well, just because people are stupid about things doesn't mean that their opinion is valid.
That's certainly true. I agree with that.
Okay, well, do you think there is a hierarchy in literary quality?
I think that there is a hierarchy to an extent in literary quality, but I think once you get to a certain threshold, it is just opinion. Like, I agree. Dostoevsky is better than a porno mag, but is F. Scott...
No, actually, just for people in the back who didn't get the point I was making, Jordan Peterson's definition of worship is retarded. This is actually the point I was making. The point I was making is not that we worship socialism. The point I was making is that Jordan Peterson's entire definition about what it means to worship something is retarded and unhinged, and as evidenced by the fact that he's literally changing it and making up a new definition on the fly in front of us right now.
Fitzgerald better than Ernest Hemingway? I don't know.
Yeah, fair enough. Why do you think that?
Because of what a book is, what literature is. Dostoevsky, he follows what literature is the purpose of more than the porno magazine.
Okay, good. Well,
so it's about purpose and definitions.
Sure. Let me give you an analog then. Okay. The depth of worship is analogous to depth of literary significance. And the closer you get to what's deep, the more religious and worshipful your practice.
So
maybe you don't know what's at the bottom, but something needs to be, or you're confused.
Well, so to use your analogy then, how deep do I have to go for it to be worship? Do I have to be Catcher in the Rye? Do I have to be War and Peace? Or
depends on what you're seeking for.
I'm seeking to know whether I worship something. You've claimed I worship something, and
if you want to have a deep and meaningful life, then you have to go all the way to the bottom or the top. And insofar as you're capable of doing that, because otherwise you'll be fragmented and miserable and anxiety-ridden and hopeless.
So I have to worship something to have a meaningful life. And if I
There's
worship
no difference between those two things.
Okay.
They're the same thing.
So if I don't worship anything, my life will not be meaningful, correct?
Well, that's the definition of nihilism.
Okay. So if I'm a nihilist, I don't worship anything.
That's true. And then you...
Oh, okay. You just said everybody worships something. I think you just agreed there is a class of people that doesn't.
Well, they're incoherent in their worship, and hand gestures like that aren't going to help. Yeah.
Okay.
Look, if you're incoherent and fragmented and aimless, which is what happens if your objects of worship are unstructured and chaotic, then you're going to be anxiety-ridden and without hope. That happens. That's a technical argument.
But there's happy nihilists.
Oh,
How do you explain that there are happy nihilists then? Because
well,
you just said they
the
can't
mere
be.
fact that you state that there are happy nihilists doesn't make it true. Like, what's your evidence? That how do you measure nihilism, and how have you associated it with happiness? And what's your definition of happiness? And have you compared them to religious people? Because if you do, by the way, it's clearly the case that religious people over the long run have better mental health. It's a well-documented fact in psychological literature.
Sure.
So your claim is just a claim. It doesn't stand on anything.
So you disagree with the claim that there exists even one happy nihilist?
I didn't say that.
Okay, would you agree there exists at least one happy nihilist in the universe?
It's not a question that has any meaning as far as I'm concerned, because it depends on what you mean by happy, and it depends on the duration that you're trying to calculate over. Now and then there's probably some deluded soul who thinks he's a nihilist who's momentarily pleased with himself. But as a long-term strategy to deal with the future, to get along with yourself and with others, it's sadly lacking. That's why Nietzsche warned that when God died, as he announced in 1850, that people would be flooded with pointless, anxiety-ridden, hopeless nihilism. And that was what would attract them to, for example, to the false gods of totalitarianism, which is exactly what happened, because everybody worships something, even atheists who think they don't.
Aren't there unhappy Christians or devoted believers? So worshiping something is neither sufficient nor necessary for happiness then?
Well,
how can anyone know
come their
anything?
way regardless,
Exactly,
and that does
Suzanne.
happen. But it's the case that even when circumstances become deeply troublesome, that how you're oriented makes a big difference. So I'll give you an example. So the book of Job deals with the issue of unfair suffering. So Job is a good man who has everything taken away from him in the most painful possible way.
To settle a bet, right?
With Satan, yes. And so he makes the axiomatic presumption that he won't lose faith in himself or in the spirit of being itself. And that helps him remain calm and forward-looking through his time of trial.
Doesn't he absolutely curse God?
No. His wife tells him to do that.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, good. My final claim is that atheists accept Christian morality, but deny the religion's foundational stories. Hi there.
It's very nice to meet you.
What's your name?
I'm Ian.
Hi, Ian.
Yes. So God says that you can own people as property. He says that you can beat them with a rod too. He commands genocide in Deuteronomy, in Numbers, and in Samuel. I mean, they have a goddamn baby barbecue in Numbers. Like, is all of this in line with Christian ethics?
No.
So then God doesn't fit within Christian ethics.
Well, the biblical library is a continuing story, and everything written in it has to be contextualized by the entire text. There's 65,000 hyperlinks in the biblical text. And you can take pieces of it out of context and criticize them, and that's what you're doing. But that's a mistake, I think. It's an analytic mistake because you're putting the cart before the horse.
I really don't think so. I think that if we say that something is Christian ethics, then I think that all of the books essential to Christianity would fit with it, especially if it's like the main character. When we're talking about
How do you deal with
God,
the morality of war?
So
how do you think you should deal with the morality of war?
Sure. Because I feel like the morality, like I feel like Christian ethics, like this is kind of, I guess I just think it's like kind of an
How about war is not moral
absurdity to say that
or ethical?
God doesn't fit within Christian ethics, but sure. Well, we can go on my ethics. That's totally fine.
I don't know what you mean by an absurdity. What game are you playing with?
Well, I just think that it's an absurdity to say that the Christian God doesn't fit within Christian ethics, that like the Christian God isn't like Christian ethical.
I said that the specific statements that you made don't take the context of the stories into account, and so that your analytical approach is faulty.
Sure.
Don't put words in my mouth.
Sure, then let's go through the example. Yeah, so, and I apologize. So let's go through the example. So in 1 Samuel 15:3, God says, go and slaughter the Amalekites, slaughter the men, the women, the children, the infants. What's the justification for that? Is that in line
That's
with
a good
Christian
question.
ethics?
That's a good question. I don't really know what to do with the terrible, blood-soaked, saturated history of the human past. I don't know. And I don't think anybody knows. I mean, what you try to do in your own life, as far as I can tell, is to conduct yourself in a manner that makes such things much more unlikely.
Why is he so
We're all
angry?
saddled with
Again, just look at his facial expressions. Look at how he's furrowing his brow. Look at how he's hissing. Look at that. This is not. If he's just having a conversation with someone, there's literally no reason to get this upset. That kid is actually being perfectly reasonable. In fact, all these kids, even though they're probably leftists and that's fine, like whatever, every single person that Jordan Peterson has talked to in this debate has been more than reasonable to him, has been more than fair to him, has been incredibly nice and conciliatory towards him, and he's just meeting them all with like literal hate and disdain.
Yourself in a manner that makes such things much more unlikely.
He's hissing at them.
We're all saddled with the problem of the catastrophes that got us here, aren't we?
Yeah, but this one was commanded by God. That's the problem. Yeah, that's what differentiates it from anything else, is that this one, it's God saying, go and do this atrocity.
Do you think that there's ever such a thing as a righteous war?
I'm skeptical. I'm not sure. It would probably be situational.
Well, right, fair enough.
Yeah, but this one certainly wasn't a just war. The context for the Amalekite slaughter is that 400 years earlier, they fought one battle, which they lost, and God says, that's it, I'm going to wipe them off the face of the goddamn earth. And then 400 years later, he commands the Israelites to genocide their great-great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren. That's not a just war at all. And also, a genocide is not a war.
Well, a genocide can be a war, but...
Absolutely not. Look, the genociding of the Amalekites, the men, the women, and the infants, that's not a war. The infants aren't combatants.
Look, I already said that it's very difficult to look at the blood-soaked past and to know exactly what to do about it. The answer I gave to the gentleman who was sitting here before you is that it's necessary to read a text like the Bible at all of its levels of analysis simultaneously. And there's a directional morality that emerges across time that has its roots in the Old Testament, for example, with its restrictions against murder specifically, that makes itself manifest in the Christian texts as the insistence on voluntary self-sacrifice as the foundational belief. That's a profoundly anti-violence ethos.
Do you have the belief in your theology?
Well, what do you think of that? Wait a sec. Now, address what I just said.
So I'm about to address it, but I'm addressing it with a question. Do you think that God is by his very essence perfect?
You'll have to provide more.
Sure, just like maximally great in all like the great making qualities.
Sure.
Yeah, like flawless. Yeah. So,
okay,
so does a flawless thing change? Does a flawless thing reveal like more and better information over time, or would a flawless thing say, here's what's good, here's the absolute good thing to do at all circumstances in time?
Well, we know some of that.
Wait,
Tell
so
the truth. That's one.
That's totally fine, but presumably...
No. You don't get to skate over that. That's totally fine.
It's a straw man of my position. It's a straw man of the argument. So the argument is that...
Wait a sec. You said
this kid is like murdering Jordan Peterson right in front of us.
Across situations.
I didn't say any of those words. I'm not sure what conversation you're part of.
Don't be a smartass.
I'm sorry.
Seriously. I mean it. If we're going to have a serious conversation, conduct yourself properly.
Okay.
He is.
Rephrase
Jordan
your question
is the one that's not
because I must have missed it. I tried to answer.
So in my mind, I guess by my lights, a perfect being doesn't change. A perfect being, if they're maximally good, maximally moral.
Does our understanding of the perfect being change?
Our understanding might, but presumably what the perfect being is revealing.
Well, I agree. How do we distinguish between that, though, at the human level?
How do we distinguish between whether...
Between our transforming understanding of perfection and perfection itself.
Between our...
Hey, guys, we do have the community Zoom coming up. I just want to watch this a little bit longer, so we're going to start the community Zoom a little bit late. I apologize for that, but I think pretty much everyone that's going to be in the community Zoom is here in the chat anyway. So we will be starting a little bit late because I want to finish watching this.
Presumably a perfect being would be revealing all of these aspects all the time, especially if God's outside of time. I don't know how a God who's outside of time is revealing different things at different times. That just seems like incoherent to me.
Imagine something that's perfect.
Sure.
And complete.
Sure.
Okay, and it's trying to communicate with creatures who are anything but that.
Sure.
Well, they're going to get it wrong.
Sure.
Okay, now wait a sec. Do you blame that on the interpreters or the phenomena itself? For example, are you perfect in attending to your conscience?
Hold on. At the point in time when God is literally the one who created us, he could have created us in a way where we would always be receptive to these principles, where we don't have to go across like a learning curve where, maybe we'll understand like thousands of years in the future, maybe we'll do it. Oh, also, if you believe in an all-knowing God, then free will is impossible because
let's not go to that yet.
You threw free will into the mix.
Well, that was the answer to your question.
Yeah, and
you said, why wouldn't God... Well,
it's
1,000 years of deep thinking philosophers would disagree with you.
Yeah, and 1,000 years of, or at least like the last 50 years of philosophers would disagree with you. These analytic philosophers, people like Graham Oppie make arguments about the incompatibility of omniscience and free will, that if God created this world, if he chose this world instead of that world, then he makes it causally inevitable every single action that you were going to make. If he made a world where we were just electrons in love, then none of this would have happened. But by making us in this world, knowing exactly what's going to happen in the future, it makes all of those events inevitable, which means that they're all causally determined, which means that we have no free will if you believe in an all-good God or an all-knowing God that made everything.
Well, have it your way.
Okay, cool. So then the free will theodicy fails.
Well, fails for you. That doesn't mean you've disproved it. I mean,
you tried to make the argument.
Yes, you tried to make a case for a causally deterministic universe. I don't think there's any evidence for that at all.
Do you think that God could have created a different universe than the one that he created?
I have no idea.
Okay, so then there's going to be a double bind, right? So either he couldn't have done it, in which case he lacks the power, or he could have done it, in which case we don't have free will, because he chose this world instead of that world, making the events of this world instead of that world inevitable with his infallible knowledge.
I don't understand where you're headed.
Which just means that the free will defense fails. Like all this, like under
Like
your
I said,
view,
if you
under
want
your
to have
view,
it
free
fail,
will.
no problem. I don't know why it's relevant to the issue.
Do you acknowledge that under your view, free will doesn't exist?
No.
Oh, then do you want to respond to the argument?
You'll have to phrase it more
Sure,
clearly
okay.
so that someone like me can understand it.
Yeah, gotcha. So God already knows in advance everything that's going to happen, which means that by making this world instead of that world, everything is inevitable, which means that God's act of causing this world instead of that
Inevitable
world
doesn't mean determined.
It's causally inevitable if God chooses this world instead of that world.
Doesn't make
Causally,
it determined.
causally inevitable means determined.
No, it doesn't.
Absolutely, yes, it does.
Well, have it your way.
Okay.
That's not the case.
You've been voted out by the majority. Please return to your seat.
That kid did great. Yeah. See, I 100% agree with this. Jordan Peterson would be a lot happier if he could just admit that he doesn't know. Jordan Peterson doesn't have to be right about everything. No one has to be right about everything. It's okay to admit that you don't know. It's okay for there to be some mystery that you haven't figured out yet. You don't always have to fight with people.
Jordan, nice to meet you.
Very zippy. What's your name?
I'm Liam.
Hi, Liam. How you doing?
I'm
Queer
doing well. How are you?
haircut.
Not too
Queer
bad.
haircut.
Very
Queer
surrounded by
haircut.
atheists.
My question.
Queer haircut. Queer haircut. Queer haircut. Everyone sees it, right? I guess men have queer haircuts too. Queer haircut.
You, let me scoot in, would be, what does it mean to accept Christian values precisely, or Christian morality?
It means to aim up as hard as you can, no matter what happens to you.
Okay.
Okay.
So I think that that's a very broad definition of what Christian
Yeah, but it'll
morality
come
is.
in handy at some point in your life.
Right. But I think that many different disciplines and theologies.
Well, you asked for a truncated answer. I
Right.
mean, there's other ways of representing the
Yeah.
situation, but I wanted to give you something that was kind of foundational briefly.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It doesn't mean it's, exhaustive.
Yeah.
I could say that you would have to believe that Christ is God and he died for your sins,
Mhm.
right? But that's in a very difficult way to understand. That's the same claim.
Yeah. If there are other theologies and disciplines that have similar types of values, how then is that definition mean? Wouldn't those also be Christian values under your definition?
That's a good question. I spent a lot of time studying different religious systems from all over the world.
Yeah, a lot of queer activists adopt the mullet as they're queering their appearance. They're taking something that's considered ugly and then using it to make a political statement. But it's not just the mullet. It's also that he has these specific shave things at the side of his head.
World and found multiple interesting layers of concordance.
Right.
So, for example,
And the little
in ancient
bangs,
Egypt,
the little
their god
tiny
Horus,
bangs.
who was the reviving god of the totalitarian state, the corrupt he was the god of attention, right? And the Jews hypothetically came out of Egypt, and there was crosstalk between Egyptian and Jewish foundational morality, and then that bled into Christianity. I mean, human beings all over the world have come up with moral systems that fit roughly into a pattern, and they're very usefully studied. I learned a lot about Christianity by studying Taoism, for example, a lot. So I think you can make a case that Christianity formalized the landscape of good and evil more comprehensively and in more detail than any other religious system. And I think that that's part of the reason that it defeated paganism and spread so broadly across the West and is still dominant, still understructures our culture, for example.
The way you feel about Horus or Taoism or something is how I feel about Christian morals, I think.
Yeah, but how do I feel about them?
Well, that you took inspiration from them, you learned from them. Maybe
That's a good start,
right.
Because I would say that actually constitutes belief. Like you said, well, look.
Right.
In Noah, in the story of Noah, right? Noah is inspired by the apprehension that all hell is going to break loose. Okay,
Yeah.
he regards that inspiration as God,
Okay.
right? And when God comes to Abraham, he comes to Abraham as the spirit of adventure. It's inspiration. One of the definitions of God in the Old Testament, unsurprisingly, given the derivation of the word, is inspiration. And so if you take inspiration from Christian ideas, then insofar as you do that, you are in fact a believer, which was my point with regards to atheists
Correct.
not understanding.
But have
what
you
they're
taken
rejecting.
inspiration from Taoism or from studying Egyptian mythology?
Definitely.
So then you believe them under that definition?
Yeah, but I've incorporated them into something I think that's more comprehensive.
Is it possible to take inspiration and to appreciate the teachings without being a believer in their truth claims?
It depends. No, I don't think so. But I think, you see, there are different kinds of truth claims, right? There's propositional truth claims, which are the truth claims of what you say. And then there's embodied truth claims, which is the truth claims of what you do.
I'm sorry. This is gay and retarded. This is gay and retarded. You can believe that some of the things that Christ taught are good without being a Christian. Being a Christian means that you believe Jesus Christ was the Son of God, that he died for your sins, and then he was resurrected. You can believe thou shalt not lie or thou shalt not steal. You can believe those are good principles to live your life by. Yeah, your life is probably going to go a lot smoother if you don't run around lying all the time. Your life is probably going to go a lot smoother if you're not stealing other people's shit or loving your neighbor. You know, you can believe that, you know what, my life is probably going to be just a little bit easier if I love my neighbor, if I get along with my neighbor, if I don't fuck my neighbor over, if I don't cut down my neighbor's tree just to piss them off. Like, you can believe that all of these things are true and not be a Christian because you don't believe that Christ is the Son of God and died for your sins and was resurrected 3 days later. It's like Jordan Peterson is now lumping everyone who believes thou shalt not lie into like, oh, that automatically makes you a Christian. That is both gay and retarded.
Optimally, what you say and what you do would be brought into harmony. But I would say if you had to prioritize, it should be what you attend to and what you act first. And that's what Christ actually says in the Gospels, because he points to the Pharisees, for example, who say all the right things, but don't do any of the right things, and points out very clearly that that's not acceptable.
I don't know that the Christian morality, those principles originate in Christianity, because you brought up other things that predate Christianity that you can very closely tie connections to.
Well, I don't think they do originate precisely. I mean,
right.
I don't think the Christian claim is exactly that they originate in Christianity.
So if I'm living those values, how is it that I'm living the Christian values and maybe not the Egyptian values or something else?
Well,
that
was good. That was good. Yeah.
All right. Guys, I know there's a little bit left of this. We do have to wrap it up, though, because I do have a community Zoom call. I don't want to be too late for it. So we watched the majority of this, and I think the conclusion that I've come to is that Jordan Peterson is gay and retarded, and Jordan Peterson is a fraud, and Jordan Peterson should either admit that he's a Christian or admit that he's not a Christian, and he should show some level of intellectual integrity. And if Jordan Peterson doesn't want to talk about whether or not he's a Christian, he shouldn't do a debate with atheists. Like, I mean, listen, I'm not a world-renowned clinical psychologist or nothing, but like, I just feel like this is common sense. If you don't want to talk about whether or not you're a Christian, don't have a debate on the topic of Christianity. It's like, bro. All right, guys, we're going to go do the community Zoom now. If you want to join us for the community Zoom, head over to the Substack. Check out the digest email that's right on the homepage. Scroll all the way down the bottom. That'll give you the Zoom link. As a reminder, MacB is also showing Godzilla versus King Kong in the supporter Discord tonight at 9 p.m., so a couple hours from now. You can also find the supporter Discord link over on the Substack. Bing! And you can join us for a movie tonight at 9 p.m., and I will be back at 5 p.m. tomorrow with something far more productive than Jordan Peterson being gay and retarded on the internet. I will be starting up the community Zoom in a couple minutes, and I will see you guys then. Take care, guys. We'll see you soon. Bye.
How are you feeling? How long have you been here? 3 months, May 17th. And what brought you here? That's difficult to answer. playing the piano for people has eventually resulted in your being here in the hospital.
That's difficult to answer.